All right, so good morning again. If you're just tuning in, it looks like we've got about 66 participants. I'm Gary Brand. I'm the Executive Director of ETOM. I'm the moderator for today's session. I'm going to introduce Kevin Wagenmaker, who's the President of ETOM, who will do some introductory comments before he turns it over to the keynote. So Kevin, take it away.
All right, thank you, Gary. Just one moment, working on sharing my screen here. Wonderful. Awesome. Well, good morning, ETOM. My name is Kevin Wagenmaker, current president of ETOM, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to be with you here today. Over the past 18 months, we've all experienced so much that has led to an amazing amount of change, adoption, adaption, innovation, perseverance. And I have been lucky enough to work alongside some awesome colleagues from Montgomery Community College and many other institutions across the state through this awesome organization that is ETOM. To hear your stories and be able to share ideas has been inspirational. Whether it's been about adding new hardware or software to your learning environments or throwing it all together with the different strategies you have come across, we have all learned a lot from one another. So you've no doubt heard the popular saying, we're building an airplane while flying, probably too many times to count. I think it's safe to say we're at the point where we can look at our learning environments like the plane has been built, but there's still a little bit more to it. We know enough to get us where we're going, but because this new plane has many bells and whistles, we still have a lot to learn. You see, the plane was upgraded while flying, and we now need to continue to learn how to use all the new bells and whistles to more efficiently fly the plane and do our job every day. We also realized that while this plane was being built mid-flight, it seems to fly a little bit faster than ever, and somehow you zoomed, no pun intended there, forward faster than you ever thought possible. But all you know is that you probably just want to get back to those open skies and cruise and get to know all of these new amenities that have been thrown your way, regardless of what role you are in. Just know that we're all in the same boat, or I should say plane. As an organization, ETOM is here to support you and work with you along the way. So before we dive into all the awesome we have planned for you today, I'd like to just kind of go over a few ETOM news items. The first thing that I want to dive into is a few thank yous. I want to thank Gary Brand, our executive director of ETOM, for all the work that he does behind the scenes and making this whole engine, plane, whatever you want to call it, go. I also want to thank the ETOM executive board. We spent a lot of time planning behind the scenes, and you're going to see the results, the fruits of our labor today. And then lastly, all of you, the ETOM membership, for all that you do to bring collaboration and ideas and innovation and awesomeness to this organization. I'd also like to welcome a new executive board member, John Haroff. He comes to us from Delta College, serves as an lead instructional designer or specialist there. John comes to us as a result of Stacy Whitten of Schoolcraft stepping down due to workload demands at her institution. A couple important ETOM items related to what we have to offer you. First of all, we're going to continue with our ETOM meetups like we have been doing. For those of you that aren't familiar with ETOM meetups, they're 45-minute sessions every other month during the lunchtime hour on particular topics related to teaching and learning. And we'd love to have you join us for them. The next one coming up is going to be brought to you by Grand Valley State University, focusing on high flex. Sounds like a familiar topic, huh? So we'd love to have you join us for that. We're also looking at some new things that we can bring your way. You may have seen a blog post. We have another one coming soon, so stay tuned for that. You can find that on the ETOM website, etom.org. And if you're interested or can't find it, just let us know and we'll be sure to point you in the direction of the blog. If anyone is interested in contributing to the blog or taking a turn at writing the blog for the month, we would love to hear from you and love to spotlight you and your institution. We also have something awesome coming up. It's a workshop series. It's going to kind of go along the lines of our ETOM Connect meetups, but this is going to be more focused. We're going to bring in some subject matter experts. And the first one that we're going to have is going to feature Dr. Taz Daniels from the University of Michigan. We're still working on some details in terms of a time and a date. It will most likely happen in February, but she's going to lead us in our initial workshop on building community in our high flex settings. So stay tuned for more information on that. The best news about all these things is, as an ETOM member, they're free for you. So you will not have to pay anything to attend these. So we look forward to you joining us in those. So now we're ready to get the party started. And to do that, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. So in the words of our keynote, I have always wanted to teach. That probably sounds familiar for a lot of you. Our keynote comes to us all the way from sunny Orange County, California. As a university professor and dean of teaching and learning at Vanguard University in Orange County, our keynote loves to collaborate with other faculty toward the mission of improving teaching. Our keynote also hosts the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast, which has over 350 episodes and over 2 million downloads. Please join me in welcoming Bonnie Stachowiak.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's great to be here with all of you this morning. And I am both excited and a little bit intimidated because the title of this morning's keynote is The Way Out. And spoiler alert, I'm not sure there is one. So we're going to work through this together. We're going to be collaborating together on asking that question of ourselves. And I am very honored to be here with you this morning. I'd like to share just a little bit about myself and get us started this morning. So I started teaching about 18 years ago. I mean, teaching in a higher ed context. Prior to that, I used to work for a computer training company. So I still do really enjoy technology and the things that it affords us. And I'm also challenged by the things that it takes away from us at times. So I have a family. I have 2 kids. You'll hear a little bit about them in a while. They are 7 and 9, and they are quite curious, and I absolutely love that about them. It's infectious. I'm sure those of you that get to spend any time around curious people know what that is like. And I really enjoy teaching. As was said, I can remember teaching my dolls when I was 5 and 6 years old, and that's really been in my heart and something that I love to do ever since then. And I also am in a unique position that since June of 2014, I have been able to talk to people from all over the world who I admire, who challenge me to be better at what I do. And as was mentioned previously, I've hosted a podcast called Teaching in Higher Ed, and it's just been an ongoing conversation in my life, and I know in some of yours as well. As of yesterday, Thursday, 386 episodes have aired. 2.5 million downloads, 352 guests because sometimes they come back, and 147-ish countries. I was actually updating this number the other day and was trying to decide how many downloads constitutes a country. So it's just absolutely remarkable, the community that I get to be a part of in all of these conversations about teaching over these years. And something that I like to do when I attend a conference, I shouldn't say I like to do it. I'm a big note taker, but I also enjoy sitting back and relaxing a little bit. So there's often this tension of exactly what resources might be available after the talk. And I'd like to begin at the end of the talk and what you will be left with. And that is that I do have a dedicated resources page for this talk. So you'll have the slide deck that I'm sharing with you now that you can download or browse, and all of the resources that I will be sharing with you as well. The nice thing about it is that after this morning, I can also update it. So you'll have an opportunity to be sharing resources that are coming to your mind, and I can curate those and add them after the talk. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you and being able to learn from you, because that's really where I feel the most comfortable. So this is the website, and if someone wouldn't mind putting this in the chat, that would be great. It's teachinginhighered.com/ETOM Connect, and the capitals don't matter in this particular link, so lowercase is fine. So if someone would just put that in the chat, that would be great. I'll give just a moment for that to happen, and if you want to bookmark this, I'll also be sharing this link at the end. But for those of you that are with us now, I want to give you that opportunity to capture this and be able to save it for after today. Looks like we've got it there in the chat. Thanks so much. All right. It is time for our first poll. So I'm going to switch on over here for a moment and ask you a deep question. No, I am somewhat being sarcastic here. I'm going to ask you a lighthearted question. So get ready. We're going to be, you could use a second device if you'd like, or I'm going to post the link here in just a moment. This will show up in the chat. It'll be an easy way for you to join this poll. And I'll also pull it up here in just a moment. This poll I first was introduced to by V.G. Sathi from the University of North Carolina, and I just love this one. So if you would take a moment and please click on the cat that best represents how you are feeling today. And again, that link is in the chat to participate. And you can also join on pollev.com/DRB as in Bonnie, S as in Stahoviak. We'll see how we're all feeling this morning. I do start to feel a little bit concerned that our number one is the 8 cat. I'm going to do my best. Everything that I have in my ability to influence others is to move us maybe, I don't know, to 5. Those of you that are there, we could perhaps join you. The thing that cracks me up about this one is that if you're familiar with a Rorschach test, that's what psychologists gave, where you look at the ink blots and you see whatever it is you want to see in said ink blots. I find for this particular survey that the cat number 4 tends to mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The answer I've gotten on why do you feel like cat number 4 that I found the most hysterical came from one of my students who replied, it's because it's leg day. So that some of you, it may be leg day. One of the other answers I have heard to number 4 had to do with stories I can't necessarily tell in mixed company, or I may offend someone, but let's just say that cat wasn't as relaxed as some of us think the cat appears to be in that person's mind. So this is really fun to be able to see. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to check in with you and see how you're doing. And we'll be coming back to these polls in a little while as well, and checking in and getting your answers. I will also be making extensive use of the chat as we continue our way together. And if you are just joining us now, we will be having more polls, and also I'll be sharing the link to today's session with all of the slides and resources associated with today. Thanks for participating in that poll. So today we are looking at the way out, and I wanted to just reflect a little bit about looking back first and my early memories of the pandemic. The picture on the right here is of me the first time out and about wearing a mask and trying to envision for myself what this would be to attempt to teach this way, to attempt to connect with people this way. I'm a little bit hard of hearing, so that's been a little bit problematic for me, because when I can't see facial expressions, then that really diminishes my ability to feel like I'm comprehending and able to connect with people. I suspect so many of you have felt those feelings of wanting to connect, and whether it was technology or whether it was these encumbrances like masks, just the difficulty that it is to try to do what so many of us love doing, but felt limited by some of the factors we were facing. I feel very fortunate that our kids thrived in online learning. They have 2 parents who live a lot of our lives on technology, whether that be teaching. My husband has a leadership podcast that's called Coaching for Leaders, and he runs leadership academies with people from all over the world. So let's just say we have a really good internet connection here at home. And so neither of them were hindered at all, whether that be devices. We also like to buy a lot of devices, so they get to be advantaged by our hand-me-downs, if you will. And this picture of our daughter has nothing to do with the quality of their education, because they had absolutely exceptional remote learning. It was fascinating to watch as their school would learn as they went along and make some really good adjustments as they went to meet the kids' needs. So this is not at all meant as a reflection on their education, which has been superb. It's more of a reflection of how exhausting pandemics can be for all of us. This, by the way, was not her teacher live. This was her teacher on a recording. And this was the only time that she took a nap throughout the entire pandemic. So if that tells you anything, I just thought it was such a sweet thing that, we all got tired. We all had difficulty. We all can remember those early days of what we were learning and what we were challenged by. As I prepared for the time with you this morning, I attempted to go and look up a story about what I thought were the 3 million lives that have been lost to COVID. And I couldn't find a recent story in the last few days. And that's because my memory was failing me. We had surpassed 3 million some time ago. And now just the other day passed a death toll around the world of 5 million. And I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the ramifications and some of the data that we know about what's been going on in higher education, because we know that COVID did not affect our schools, did not affect our students, and of course, did not affect us. So in a study done by the Hope for Learning organization, their Real College 2021 survey, they discovered that 41% of students in higher education that they surveyed had lost a close friend or family member. They had become sick with COVID-19. 7% of those who were studied were sick themselves with COVID-19. 13% had lost a loved one to COVID-19. And we also know that, and you're going to hear in these forthcoming data, that everything didn't land equally among us, that some of us were hit heavier than others. And so our Latinx students had 2 times, for example, a greater likelihood than white students to have lost a loved one to COVID-19. I work at a Hispanic serving institution, and I both see this firsthand anecdotally through the students I have the privilege of teaching, and certainly we see this as widespread across the United States. The survey that I have been mentioning is Real College 2021. This is a basic needs insecurity survey that was conducted, and I'm going to share with you a little bit more of the data as we consider what the pandemic has done across our country. This is a survey of 200,000 students from 42 states and from 202 colleges and universities. Nearly 3 in 5 of the students surveyed experienced basic needs insecurity. So that's both food and housing insecurity. And we have ran a survey at my institution, and these numbers do definitely reflect ours, even though we've not officially participated in the formal survey, but we have used some of their survey questions in collecting data from our students. We see about a 10% difference between 2-year institutions, those students there feeling an even more profound effect than those at 4-year institutions. And when it comes to housing insecurity specifically, 48% of the students surveyed experienced housing insecurity, and 14% are experiencing homelessness. Another aspect that I'd like us to consider is, of course, a related one, and that is issues of mental health. And so the survey I'd like to share a little bit with you now is the role of faculty in student mental health from the Mary Christie Institute. And I've had the great opportunity to interview some of the researchers that worked on this particular study, including a researcher from Boston University and another from a nonprofit called the Healthy Minds organization. So the first question we're going to look at here is how, if at all, has student mental health changed since the COVID-19 pandemic began? This is a survey of faculty. And so you'll see here that 42 0.8% said that their observations were that it significantly worsened, and 44.4% said it somewhat worsened. And just as I said before, we're going to start to see that this affected us in some different ways depending on our roles in our organization. But just to go back for one quick moment, those two numbers combined, in case this didn't stand out to you, 88% of us, if asked, are likely to say that either we have seen and observed and believe that our student mental health has somewhat or substantially worsened since COVID-19 first hit us. And as we saw previously, we know that we'll sometimes see some disproportional effects. So many of us might have spent some time on the phone with a student or emailing or on Zoom who are experiencing some kind of mental health challenges. So 80% of us are likely to have had phone, video, email conversations in the last 12 months regarding student mental health or wellness. I'd be interested even just today, how many of you in the last 24 hours have had these kinds of conversations about mental health with our students? It's been challenging. It's been difficult. It's hard to watch and to be a part of, I know. And once again, we see there are disproportional effects on those of us that are feeling these pressures of wanting to help our students, wanting to do what we can, but of course, oftentimes experiencing some of these difficulties ourselves. So we see a little bit when we extrapolate the data, 85% of female and 84% of transgender, non-binary, queer, genderqueer, or gender non-conforming experiencing these conversations, and 71%. And not to get overly scientific on this, but that's a lot. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of heaviness. That's a lot of sometimes feeling like there aren't things that we can do. Although the good news out of this particular study, and so many like them, are that just like in James Lang's book, Small Teaching, which is one of my favorite books I've ever read about teaching, we find that actually there are things that we can do that are smaller. One example that when I had an opportunity to interview the individuals about mental health that I mentioned were a part of this survey, not having assignments due at midnight, which is what most of our learning managements have as the default setting, but having them at an hour that might promote better sleep, because we know that the small step and what that could mean in terms of encouraging better sleep and the correlations and causations, in fact, between sleep and one's mental health. That's a small thing we can do that makes such a big difference. We also know that compounding the challenges of both the pandemic at large, mental health at large, that there also are issues related to discrimination and systemic racism. And so we see this data from, as we break out and disaggregate, 25% of Hispanic or Latinx, 39% of Black or African American, and 24% of Asian or Asian American, who in this survey responded that they believe that their institution is hostile or somewhat hostile towards students of color. So as we look at these dynamics, we see how things can compound upon one another to really set ourselves up for some challenging times with our students. So I'd like to take another poll here and get you to consider what you're experiencing, because we just looked at data, and the data doesn't always tell us the stories of our unique experiences and what we are finding. So let's spend a little bit of time now, and I'll put this one in the chat too as an easy way for you to get to it. This is my second poll I'm going to invite you to. Wait, just put this in the chat before we. So this poll is going to ask you to consider your own unique circumstances and to do a rank order where you can drag them around and then hit submit. Rank order the following from the most prevalent to the least for what you've experienced with your students. I'll give you a minute to consider this one and and present your answer. I put the link to this poll in the chat, and then it's also accessible if you go on a second device to pollev.com/DRBS. You should see it there. I'll just wait one more minute for people to have a chance to sort these out. This one's a hard one for me to rank because they're so mixed with one another. You know, one affects the other, affects the other, affects the other. Yeah. I had an opportunity to interview someone from the podcast about caregiving responsibilities, and my eyes were really opened at some of those impacts of our students. I learned a lot that day. So you can see how this is playing out among us. Biggest challenge that you're seeing, balancing work and school. Please feel free in the chat if you have any additional nuance that you'd like to share about what you're reflecting, and maybe any nuance that doesn't come out in just this particular way that I asked the question. You'll be able to continue to respond to that poll if you still need a minute, but I'm going to go back to the slides here. And please feel free also to continue to chat in the and have the conversation that way as well. So that's a lot. That's heavy. That's difficult for me to reflect on. And I'd like to get to a little bit something of just that feeling that we have where we really can make that difference, where despite that it seems like sometimes what we're doing is so small, that there really are things that we can do to help us together collectively find that way out. And I'd like us to begin by looking behind us, and I'd like us to think about how we learned as kids. And if you ever have the opportunity to be around kids, how they learn. And so much of that has to do with curiosity. Just 2 days ago, my daughter Hannah says, "Mommy, can I pack my book in my backpack today so I can read it after school?" This is the first time she's ever done that before. This is also one of her first chapter books. And they go from just the more pictures and a few words, and she's been doing really well at that. But the fact that she now, I'll start reading. This is, by the way, a wonderful book, a story about Ada Lovelace, who, if you're not familiar with who that is, had to do with a lot of technological and specifically programming innovations early on. I would also consider her to be a feminist icon as well. And I actually first heard about her from someone I interviewed on the podcast. And so the fact that Hannah is now so wrapped up in this story that she wants to bring it and be able to read herself. I was also, by the way, a little bit sad because I don't know all of Ada's story. And so just to be able to, okay, I guess you can take it, but then when you get home, I'm going to have to instantly catch up with you so that I know where it is that we left off together in the story. But it's so infectious when students have their imaginations ignited that way and their curiosity ignited that they don't know what happens. Josh Eiler, in his book, How Humans Learn, says that in order to learn something, we must first wonder about it. And it seems so obvious. Of course, that's obvious. You'd have to wonder about it, but yet how much of the time do we actually build our courses around wonder and curiosity and questions that don't always have neat and tidy answers. How often do we think about the power of curiosity as it relates to gaining attention and gaining the kinds of persistence that we want ourselves and our learners to have around things? Josh Eiler, in that same book, How Humans Learn, talks about how difficult it is for researchers to even agree on a definition for curiosity, but what they can agree on is that curiosity is an essential part of the way human beings learn, and it always has been. So I'd like to share a story with you about a topic that I myself have not been very curious about in my life as much as I would like to have been. I imagine what it might have been like for me had I had my curiosity ignited in this area. And I know this will be some of the disciplines that you come from, and that is the area of chemistry. And my husband and his learning had quite a different experience than I had. And it comes out with his chemistry class in high school. In fact, the first chemistry class that he took in high school. So this is Dave Stachowiak, and he's going to talk a little bit about his first high school chemistry class. I'll take it away, Dave.
It's the first day of my high school chemistry class, and the teacher goes through the normal things that you'd expect in a high school class, which is reviews the books, talks about the assignments, goes through the syllabus. And toward the end of the 45 or 50-minute class, he lights a candle on his desk right up at the front of the classroom. And he's still talking and kind of going through the logistics of the course. And then he gets to the end and he says, the one thing I really want you to learn this year in this course is that you're going to learn a lot about different properties and chemical formulas, but I really want you to remember that chemistry and the world around you isn't always what it seems. And he reaches back and he grabs the candle, still lit, picks it up, tosses the whole thing in his mouth, starts chewing, and then he says, "See you tomorrow." Walks out of the room. And I remember sitting there watching this in the front row of the class, and I turned to my friend Christy, and we said to each other, "This is going to be a great class." And it was a really good class, because once in a while he would do those things. But the interesting thing looking back now is he actually wasn't the most dynamic teacher most of the time, but because he started so strong, he didn't need to be, because we were always at the edge of our seat wondering what he'd do next.
Well, that's never happened before. Am I back now? Did you have a lovely conversation without me? Gary?
We had a great conversation that's just been coming in and coming in. We figured you probably did this on purpose just to get us all to talk to each other and be curious about whatever was going on.
I love doing this. This is my favorite thing. Well, I am glad to be back, Gary. Thank you for taking over that facilitation for that moment. I appreciate it. So tell me, catch me up a little bit, Gary. What did you discover? What are we?
So, some ideas that I saw, there was some discussion about modeling curiosity from the facilitator, from bringing in things into class and asking about it, to cases and scenarios that they might share. Dan just posted about virtual simulations, lots of different discussions about, basically application to scenarios.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I will look forward to catching up to in the chat and us continuing this conversation a little bit. And we're going to see how we do now with going to our slides. So Sarah Rose Kavanaugh, in her book, which is wonderful, by the way, called The Spark of Learning. This is back to the whole thing I told you about that Josh Eiler points out so much in his book, that researchers really have difficulty even coming to any sort of a shared definition for curiosity, but she defines it as when you burn to know what comes next, you're feeling curious. And William Arthur Ward, this quote is from him. He says, "Curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning." And then finally, Josh Eiler in his book, How Humans Learn, says that curiosity is a biological response. As a biological response, or even as an intellectual construct, curiosity is so complex and nuanced that the only thing scholars can agree on is its importance. And so, Gary, you started talking about this. It looks like this came out already in your conversation as I was dealing with my technical troubles. And that is that one of the ways we can ignite curiosity is by trying to light that wick of curiosity, and do that through puzzles and mysteries. And in Sarah Rose Kavanagh's book, she talks about thinking about puzzles versus mysteries and the affordances of each one. And she uses a couple of television shows, which may be familiar to some of you, as a way of distinguishing these things between each other. So she talks about Law and Order having a nice, clean ending. You know, if you're going to go in and watch that show or one of the ones that was built off it, you know that there's going to be a beginning and a middle and an end, and we're going to have some closure. Yes, character stories do flow over into the subsequent weeks, but for the most part, you can get a neat and tidy package all wrapped up if you were to watch one episode, versus if any of you watched the television show Lost, the idea of you weren't exactly sure what was happening. And even, I mean, some people really criticized the ending, which I won't be giving away here, but that it was disappointing because oftentimes, you know, it didn't wrap things up exactly as people had hoped that it would. We're not exactly sure what's happening. We're not exactly sure how to interpret it. There's a lot of room. And sometimes we do too much things that seemingly have right or wrong answers and not leaving enough for mystery. And I like this next episode. This next clip I'm going to play is from Joe Hoyle. He's been teaching accounting for decades, and he's been written about in a couple, actually, of James Lang's books. And in this particular clip I have from him, he's going to share about how he creates mysteries and also puzzles in his accounting class, which is not a field that is too often thought about that way, although it'd be great if it was, but is often not. So here is a clip from Joe Hoyle talking about unraveling mysteries in accounting.
So I will set up a scenario, and I will give it to the students one day ahead, and it will be a company has spent $3 million on research and development. $1 million on one project, $1 million on another project, and $1 million on another project. One doesn't look very good, one looks very, very good, and one kind of like Goldilocks is in the middle there. And I ask my students to tell me as many different ways as possible that you could report this in accounting. And now they will automatically want to tell me the rule, because the rule is in the book. And I say, I will count points off if you tell me the rule. I don't want to know the rule. I want to know the possibilities. And I want to know as many possibilities as possible. And so when they come in, we'll have been together about 6 weeks by that time. Mm-hmm. They will usually come up with 5 or 6 different possibilities. And so we'll put them up on the board and say, okay, here's 6 possibilities. And then I will say, okay, these are all the possibilities. If you're going to be king or queen of accounting rules, which one of these makes the most sense to you? And sure enough, we'll start, somebody will say this one and somebody will say that one. And what I'm trying to do is to get them to come up with their own ideas, to take that puzzle and come up with their own ideas. Then eventually, I'll say, okay, somebody tell me what the real official rule is. And they all know the official rule, and they'll all point at this one rule that has gotten no votes, because that's the official rule. And they go, I go say, okay, that's right, that's the official rule, but none of you picked it because it doesn't make any sense. And they go, yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And then I'll say, okay, do the people who make these rules, are they dumber than we are? And they go, no. We're a bunch of freshmen in college. We're not smarter than they are. There must have been some reason why they picked that rule, because we didn't pick it and they did. I need for somebody to explain to me why they picked that approach. And then we have a fascinating conversation about why would they have done it that way. And at the end, we come up with some pretty good answers. But to me, that's about a 30-minute conversation. And in that 30 minutes, I teach more about accounting than I could teach if I just talked nonstop for days.
So that was Joe Hoyle, and that's him sharing a little bit about how he tries to unravel mysteries in the discipline of accounting. And you've already pre-done my last poll question, which was how do you ignite curiosity? And I want to also talk about the element here that's critical of identity. And there are a couple people I'd like to introduce you to who do this quite well, and who I've also had an opportunity in one case to interview them for the podcast, and the other to interview someone who had written about her in her book. So, and a lot of these come from disciplines where it is often not talked about enough in terms of the importance of identity in learning and building curiosity. So Kimberly N. Russell, she teaches in STEM, and she teaches a class that would typically is very memorization intensive. It's very important for that class to have the memorization, and she's having them need to learn a lot of different types of creatures and the characteristics of them and so forth. And so what she has them do, both to help them with that memorization and that learning, but also to help them be able to bring their own identities into the classroom and build a sense of community, is she has them create a beast profile. And that beast profile can be any of the creatures that they're expected to learn in that class, which one of them is a grasshopper, by the way. I am terrified of grasshoppers. I have an irrational fear of them. When I was little, I had, I watched a grasshopper jump onto our dog's snout, and it gave the optical illusion where it looked like the grasshopper was actually flipping the dog backwards and forwards on our lawn, which of course would not at all have been possible, but as a child, it was just absolutely terrifying. So my husband Dave always teases me whenever I pass a grasshopper on the street, I'm apt to cross over to the other side of the street. So she has people bring their beast profile. They have to pick one of the beasts that gets studied in the class, and they have to identify it with some aspect of their identity, as I just did. In my case, of course, fear. But other ways that people are engaged with their beast profile might be because they're fascinated by creatures. Sarah Rose Kavanaugh is fascinated by bees. In fact, she wrote an entire book that really centers around them. And so hers is as a beast profile of a bee that she's fascinated by. And others are disgusted by creatures, so they can kind of decide how they want to create that beast profile. And then at the end of each semester or term, she has a celebration with her class. It's called a Beast Feast. And they'll bring together all kinds of dishes, whether it's shrimp cocktail or whether it's some kinds of insects that might be wrapped in chocolate, which, you know, anything wrapped in chocolate has to be good, right? And they really enjoy that sense of building community. Another person who is excellent at doing this is Anissa Ramirez. And Anissa Ramirez refers to herself as a science evangelist. And she recalls a time when she was young and she first saw someone that looked like her doing this thing that she later came to know was called science. And some of you might know about this television show. It was called 3-2-1 Contact. And 3-2-1 Contact had different vignettes that they would repeat over many series. And this one was called The Bloodhound Gang. And when Anissa Ramirez came on to teaching in higher ed, she shared the story that by seeing my reflection in this young African-American lady on television doing science, it gave me permission to say, maybe I should be doing this thing called science. So I also want to share with you now a few things that we can do to show care for our students, because that is one of the ways that big and small we can be helpful. And all of the things that I talked about earlier, the effects of the pandemic, the effects on mental health, the effects that so many of our historically marginalized students feel with not being able to always feel like they can bring their full identities into the classrooms. And rather than me sharing this, I'd actually like to share a video that I think I've maybe watched more than any other video, and it comes from someone named Mike Wesh. And Mike Wesh has had the experience that so many of us have had in his class of having someone who falls asleep. And before I show Mike's video, I'd love to have you share in the chat, what is one reason why someone might fall asleep in your class? What is one reason why someone might fall asleep in your class? Go ahead and put that in the chat. Thank you for all these answers. I'm seeing all different types. If I were to try to divide them into two categories, which is always a dangerous thing to do, but my dissertation, one of the things that was involved in my study way back when was something called locus of control. And locus of control is how we explain what happens to us. There's two broad ways of thinking about how we explain what happens. Some of that is having a locus of control where it's outside factors. And some of you are mentioning things like the student may have had to work late, the student may have been working, taking care of children, stress, anxiety, all of those. And then there are the internal locus of control things that happen as well, such as I was boring, I wasn't good enough. And so let's hear a little bit now from Mike Wesh on the sleeper as he shares about his own experience with a student who fell asleep in his class.
I'm pretty sensitive to student reactions in my classes. For better or worse, I really feed off of them. I had one student who was just always sleeping. Or if he wasn't sleeping, he was giving me this strange, dreadful look. And here I was, armed with a dazzling HD screen with 2,073,600 points of light and a laser pointer, and I just couldn't get through to him. Actually, I had 4 screens. I mean, I tried everything, and the more I threw myself into it, the more it hurt. Every time I saw him, I couldn't help but think, I must be really boring. Nothing I do or say matters. This class is meaningless. I'm wasting everybody's time. Sometimes I just get mad. And who does he think he is? One day I just had enough, and I was just ready to, I don't know. And I went up to him and I said, "Do you want to go to lunch?" I asked him why he sleeps in my classes, and he started to describe his addiction to games. But it's more than that. He doesn't just play them, he makes them. He started describing a complex game he invented that used mythological heroes on hexagon cards that created what he called a fog of war game mechanic. I couldn't quite see it all, but I did see something else. I saw somebody who could, would, and has thrown themselves into meaningful creative projects. I found someone who has been mishandled, mistreated, and underappreciated by an education system focused on frustratingly narrow pursuits. So I invited him to be part of a different kind of class. No PowerPoints, no lectures, no textbooks, no syllabus, no grades. A class where students are respected for their strengths and given a chance to discover them. Because that's the real tragedy. It's not just that I saw David in a certain way, it's that he saw himself that way too. But after watching him work day and night on our project to create a game, I see him and other sleepers a little differently.
love to have you share in the chat what is one takeaway you have from watching that video, whether it's your first time or whether you, like me, have watched it many, many times over. What is one takeaway you have from watching that video from Mike Wesch or rewatching it? Yeah, it is such a good video, isn't it? Yeah, I'm seeing so many themes coming out of what you're sharing. Thank you so much. Yeah, the point about asking these questions privately, I've learned that one the hard way. Unfortunately, it's been many years, but yes, we take that away when we make those mistakes. These are conversations best had privately. Yeah. But asking the question, being willing to set our assumptions aside. For me, I think it's important to acknowledge my assumptions first, to acknowledge them, not to try to pretend that they're not there. They are there. Sometimes it does feel disrespectful. Sometimes it does seem like I'm boring or there must be something better. You know, sometimes I do ascribe things that may or may not be anything resembling a reason, but to acknowledge them, to acknowledge the pain that it feels to be trying so hard to do something that you want to have meaning, you want to have significance, to acknowledge that first, but to put those things aside then and to ask the questions and to realize how often of the time we may be wrong. The thing that I love about David's story, David is the young man who fell asleep in Mike Wesch's class, is the outcome of it. Alzheimer's runs in our family. That is how I lost my grandmother many decades ago. And it is how any day, any time, any week, I won't be surprised to learn the news that an aunt has passed away from it. And it is also something that a family member and my mom and I worry that that same fate may be hers. And to see that when we ask the questions of people in this way, when we are able to set aside our egos, our pride, our assumptions, our biases, and to engage in that way, on the other hand, it can be an outcome of a young man creating a game that helps people be more empathetic toward things that affect people that you love, people that, you know, in case that you might have a family member who's affected by it. You may have a student in your class who's going to end up being part of finding a cure for cancer. You may have a student in your class who's going to be a wonderful mental health professional. We just don't know what will happen, but we do know what will happen if we come at them with all our own insecurities and our own pride mashed together kind of in this toxic mixture. So thank you so much for those comments. And if any of you are struggling with this, if this is something that you've not thought a lot about, and maybe you possibly feel some failure, please know that I join you in that failure. I have done this wrong. I'm sure I will do this wrong again. I mean, this is not a pass or fail sort of thing. This is a journey. This is a quest, and I'm glad that we're on it together and we can build communities like the one that you've built here in ETOM to do that. So I just have a few final words, and then we'll open it up for some questions and for some more comments and engagement as well. So this is emblematic in Mike Wesch's video, in that how powerful it can be when we find something that students care about. And in order to do that, we do often need to start with what does make them curious, what does make them wonder about things, how can we help them ask more questions about a discipline that we perhaps fell in love with so long ago that we can't even remember what it was in the first place that made it so fascinating and interesting to us. So igniting that curiosity, helping them wonder, helping them ask questions. And there's all sorts of ways we can do that, whether it's humor, whether it's scenarios, simulations like some of you talked about earlier. But can we also tap into the things that they care about, things that they have a passion about? And I was able to interview a couple of professors from the Cal State University system who help students ultimately where they help them to get to is to learn how to build what are called solar suitcases. And they work with a nonprofit and they build them into energy poor communities, and they help the people in the community learn how to build them themselves. And they have been able to, the students and the faculty have been able to even travel to communities where they didn't have even the basics of electricity to be able to, for example, light up their hospitals. And so where most of us, myself very much included, might have started a class like this about how circuits work with how circuits work, but instead they start the class out with the power of community, the power of doing things together. And it's kind of a stereotypical example for many of us. We talk about the joy that it is to see the light bulb go on in our students' eyes. And so what they do is they have a gadget that if the whole class holds hands and they're using this gadget, they can actually light up a light bulb together. And they talk about how we're going to do this together. We're going to learn the information in this class, and then we're going to be able to go out into our communities that don't have access to electricity, to power, even for something as basic as a hospital. And then we're going to be able to see the transformative effects of our learning. And when I hear stories like this, it can feel so big. I wouldn't ever be able to do something quite that big. But that's where I encourage us to even just start small and be willing to ask the question where we find out what our students care about. Because so many times they're already tapped into communities. They might already volunteer at a nonprofit. They already might belong to a church or a synagogue. They might already belong to a community organization where they're tapped in. And then if you can help them explain how they're learning, might be able to tap into those networks that they're already a part of, or perhaps your university or your college already has ways of doing this. They already are partnering with community organizations. And then it's all about how to shrink down your ability to do it, but to help tap them into those people who could connect them with those kinds of ideas. I really do think that James Lang, when he talks about small teaching and just our ability to shrink things down, can be such a profound thing for us. Karina Garbisi is the person who was pictured in that first photograph of her sitting next to that solar panel. And she said on the episode, when I got to interview her, she said, everybody has this hidden desire to want to do something meaningful in the world. And of course, that includes us. That includes us as we are asking ourselves the question, what is the way out? What is behind us, both in terms of the ways that we learned as kids and how we might be able to tap into that today. By the way, and I don't know if you can tell this on the Zoom, but in the background of this picture is a set of Lego. And I even have a colleague who brings Lego and invites people to all these different random minifigures and pieces of Lego, and they create little vignettes of who they are as a teacher. She's a teacher educator. And so who you are as a teacher, show me through Lego. I mean, there's all kinds of things we can do. One of you mentioned earlier using props in our teaching, all these different small ways that we can help people tap into their own sense of identity, their own sense of curiosity, to start asking those questions and to help us with that way out. And I'd like us just to end on this one thing, and then again, want to open it up to questions and more comments that you have. And I'd like us to think about what Mary Oliver says is the way out for her, what she says in her poem, Instructions for Living a Life. Pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening in both within the pandemic, mental health issues. Pay attention to our students, set our biases aside, set our whenever there are this animosity where it feels like there are adversaries. Kevin Gannon talks about in his book about hope. He says, students are not our adversaries. And once we can really frame it that way and we can orient ourselves that way, it can help us pay attention even more. And even more so, we can then be astonished at these incredible people that we have the opportunity to be some small part of their education, be astonished and find ways where you can help them rediscover their curiosity that maybe whatever educational systems they've been a part of has squashed in some way. Maybe they're not asking if they can tuck their books away to bring them to school with them so they might catch an additional opportunity to absorb that. Maybe that's been lost for some time, and maybe we could be just some small part of being astonished about these people and helping them be astonished about what it is that they're learning, helping them see the relevance of it. And lastly, to tell about it, for us to get together, whether it's conferences like the one that we're participating in today, or whether it's just a conversation over coffee with a colleague, but to be able to talk about the things that we're discovering and the amazing things that our students are showing us and how they're helping us learn and become better educators and learners ourselves. So that's a little bit I have. And I promised you that at the end I would bring that link back up again. And so I'll put it in the chat, and also want to invite you in the chat to be making any comments that you have, any resources that come to mind if you haven't already as we share, and then also questions that you have. So I'm going to put this link in the chat and invite you to ask questions or make comments, and I'll stop sharing my screen in just a moment. There we go. Questions and comments there in the chat. I have a session I'm thrilled to be able to share with you this afternoon, and kind of in preparation for that session, I'd like to ask you one other poll question too. So I'll put this poll in the chat as you're typing in questions and comments there in the chat. Oh, Kelly, thank you for that comment about starting a faculty learning community. All right, let's do this. Let's do this last poll as you're typing in any questions you have or any comments or resources I should add to that page. This is another rank order. And again, you can respond using the link I put in the show notes or at pollev.com/drbs. And this is a little bit of a preparation for this afternoon session, but also can get us thinking about what we just talked about as well. So these are now things for yourself. What's concerning you right now in your own life, in your own teaching? Give you just another minute to do the poll if you'd like to. All right, let's take a look. Oh, I feel you on that one. Yeah, so far, some of you are still answering, but so far we've got, and you still can answer, by the way, but so far it's looking like coming in first place is having enough time to teach, prep, grade, and take care of everything else. We're going to talk about that a little bit this afternoon. I don't have an easy answer, by the way. There's no magic sauce that you're somehow missing, but I have a few practices that sometimes work for me and other times I'm struggling with it right along with you. Yeah. I just interviewed an author of a book called The End of Burnout. His name is John Malesic, and his book comes out in January. but that burnout stress is real. That's coming. It was coming in number 2. Now it's coming in number 3. But yeah, it's a really good book. A haunting book, but a really good book as well. So that's something you can, if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear an episode in January, and his book again comes out in January. It's really good. The End of Burnout. Some of you having trouble engaging students during this time. Yeah, I definitely have changed a lot on how I do that and how I even measure success. What does success even look like for that? Yeah, thank you so much for your responses. You'll be able to still continue to respond if you didn't have a chance to yet. I'm just going to switch over to the, I'll put the author's name in there. Yeah. The book is called The End of Burnout. And the author's name is John Milesic. I keep pronouncing it wrong because I discovered I was saying it wrong. I'll find a link to it as well. It's a really good book. University of California Press. I'll put that in the chat. And thanks to Ian for a couple of sites, or a couple of tools I can add to the website. Thanks, Ian. And I'll be checking if others did that as well. Other things we should add there, questions that you have. Yeah. Before we close our time, can I invite you to just share one thing that you're going to be taking away from this morning's session? One takeaway, big or small? What's one thing you want to think more about, try out, experiment with, ask more about, wonder about? Yeah, thank you for the comment about what time to set due dates for assignments. Another small thing that we can do that you may have heard of previously is putting a basic needs statement in our syllabi. So something that just reduces the stigma. Oh, if there's a place where they can go on your campus to access food or other supplies, we have what's called the Living Well Community Resource Center at our institution. And so just to put that in the syllabus, hey, if you're experiencing where you're not having enough to eat, or if you're concerned about your housing, here's a place where you can go. And just normalizing that and having it in a place as public as a syllabus can be something that helps as well. So thank you for that. Eliza's talking about creating a Google form asking for extensions to help with outside issues that come up. I saw someone post something like that the other day on Twitter, just a really simple thing. Because otherwise what happens, I'm sure you're aware of this, is it's only the people who know to ask. And I've seen just haunting stories where the student in one particular case had a miscarriage and missed an assignment, but didn't even realize that she could ask to have an extension. And so when we make our ability to ask for extensions a little bit more public, we're not going to have people who feel like they can't ask, who feel like that's not allowed. We're not going to have them receive sort of none of us would ever want that. I sadly just had a student lost her dad 10 days ago. And she, oh, is it okay if I turn in the assignments late? Yes, it's perfectly okay. So just to be a little bit more transparent. That's not to say, by the way, that deadlines aren't important. Deadlines, of course, can help in our classes create that structure where they can sustain their learning over a semester or a term. And not that they're not important, but just that, of course, if someone has that kind of a trauma in their life, you would want them to know that they could ask for extensions and not have that be only sort of a hidden curriculum only known to some people in the class. Yeah, Paula's talking about having a student call right as they were about to go into surgery. Yeah, I've had students email from hospitals with family members in the ICU. Same, yeah. Yeah, I like the idea of, giving them that flexibility and yet needing to be more transparent about it too. Yeah. And back to the subject of John Malosek's book about burnout, we've also had colleagues probably do the same, email us from a hospital room themselves. Yeah. Any questions as we close our time together? Or any other takeaways you want to mention? Oh, thanks for sharing that form. Eliza's got the form in there.
Well, thank you, Bonnie. I'm going to jump over to my next session to moderate. So I will see you later. I'll see you all, folks, all in the next session.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciate everybody's time, and thanks for your patience with my first ever technological way I couldn't get my way out of besides a cold reboot. But at least I'm among friends who know what a cold reboot is.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, thanks everybody for your continued conversation there in the chat. That's great.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, I'm not able to download the chat. I was thinking that I would be able to in order to add those resources. So if you could grab that, or someone could grab that, it's not showing me that I have permission to do that. So
I'm guessing that Gary has access to do that for you.
Okay, I'm afraid I'll miss some great resource that someone shared. So yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. And I'll see many of you hopefully this afternoon as well.
All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. My name is Kathy McCollum, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. If you've not already done so, please make sure you mute your microphone. And any questions that you have, you're welcome to type them into the chat. We will be recording the session. It is live streamed on YouTube. So with that, we'll go ahead and get ourselves started. So this breakout session is titled Make the Most of Pandemic Learned Practices. Hopefully you are in the right room. And the session description says, even if you're teaching face-to-face classes, there are great things that we learned during the pandemic that can continue to enhance our courses. These best practices can really work in any modality, from face-to-face to fully online. Come hear about how to keep your course flexible with due dates and course meeting dates, while still being able to reasonably manage your time and be clear to students. We'll discuss tools that can help continue the conversation outside of class, including forums, Slack, and virtual conferencing, or assist students who cannot come to class, such as lecture capture. Learn about efficient ways to present your course materials, receive assignments, and promote collaboration that will make it not only easier on faculty and students, but will facilitate a seamless transition to different modalities if emergency closure must happen again. Please join me in welcoming our speakers for this session, Sean Moore and Jess Tess Navarro from Oakland University. Thank you both for being here. And I will turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you so much. So my name is Jess. I'm an instructional designer at our e-learning and instructional design office at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. In addition to everything else I do in my role, I wanted to point out that I co-facilitate our Quality Online certification courses on a regular basis each semester. And I have previously adjunct in our writing and rhetoric department. Previously, I want to pass it over to Sean.
Oh, thank you. And I am Sean Blackbeard Moore, and I am the director of e-learning. I've been in this industry since 2001, since I was born. And so we're excited to talk to you about some of the things we learned during the pandemic. While we get started here, if you want to open up the chat, can you let us know? We're interested in seeing who's here, especially your roles. If you're a faculty member, a staff member, maybe a TA, GA, something like that, and maybe where you're from. So if you can open up the chat and start to give us an idea, we'll get going that way.
And while you're doing that, I want to point out that while Sean is my director, I like to think of him as my puppet leader for my secret regime at eList. So that's our little secret. Please keep that between us. And while you are also putting those mentions into the chat, we invite you to continue to do that throughout the session. We do want to make this somewhat interactive, and we'd even love it if you feel brave enough to unmic yourself and give us any comments, but the chat is great too. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And I was thinking earlier at the beginning of the conference about, we're on an airplane that we're building while we fly. And believe it or not, I had not heard that previously, although I find it quite accurate. I have been thinking that many of our faculty have felt like contortionists, that with all the twists and turns of the pandemic, we're trying to fit ourselves into these new situations with our students and our teaching. And so hopefully we're going to discuss today some new moves that you may or may not have learned that you can continue to keep into your repertoire. And those things will feel less and less like being a contortionist with practice and more like just some smooth flexibility. I like to, see that even if I can't touch my toes yet, I can at least, get a few more inches. Hopefully you don't find yourself overextended. All right, so while you're continuing to let us know who you are in the chat, let's talk about our objectives today. We hope that by the time you leave this session, we want you to be able to identify pandemic learning practices that are going to hopefully increase your efficiency, not only for yourself, but your students in all course settings, not just the type of pandemic situations we've been in throughout the past 1.5 to 2 years. And you will hopefully feel more prepared to facilitate a more seamless transition with these practices in the event of future emergency closures. So the first thing we wanted to talk about is flexing the course. Now, I want to be clear that we're not specifically talking about high flex in this situation, although it could fit into this category. Instead, we're thinking about more micro ways you may have learned how to flex your course throughout the past few semesters. As I mentioned in my intro, I do co-facilitate our Quality Online teaching certification courses. And so it gives us a great chance to talk to our faculty about the things that they have been doing. One of those things has been really being flexible about meeting dates. And I think previous to the pandemic, we really thought of this as something very rigid. There's a structure assigned to our class. We set it into stone in the syllabus, and that is it. But as we've been talking to our faculty at Open University, we are hearing them do a number of different things to be more flexible in their courses around meeting dates. Some of those things have been not requiring all synchronous courses, whether their course is listed as completely synchronous or that is in addition to their asynchronous courses. So maybe making some of them required and some of them optional. In addition, we've talked to faculty who are keeping their synchronous sessions primarily just for having guest lecturers or for some very specific purpose in their courses. Or there are some faculty we've talked to who are not having any synchronous sessions unless they are going to be having one-on-one office hours with students. And they may even be making those one-on-one office hours required. Because even in fully asynchronous courses, most of the faculty we talk to, they do find some synchronous contact with their students on a regular basis to be, extremely helpful for building community and trust and connections and all those types of things. So really, there's a variety of things going on. We heard in our keynote a discussion about flexible due dates, and I personally really love the idea of having a form available, a very specific process about how students would ask for flexibility or extensions or different things around due dates. We know those cause a lot of stress for our students and sometimes for ourselves, especially if we've put into our syllabus, expectations for students about, how quickly we are going to turn around grades. So this is an opportunity to be kind to ourselves as well. Something I heard from faculty recently that I thought was really excellent is that even if they have synchronous sessions, they're going to ask students to do presentations in a new way, which is with pre-recorded student presentations. I know I have attended a few virtual conferences throughout the pandemic where this has been extended to presenters that you can either present live or pre-record your session and that it will be played at the conference. And I've seen this happen in the classroom as well. I know some instructors, really put a lot of emphasis on the importance of asking their students to present live, and that still is, very possible over video conferencing. But considering if pre-recording the presentation is something that would help your students build and show their skills in a different way is great too. And then lastly, a lot of us, I think, have switched, if we weren't already pre-pandemic, to doing some type of flipped classroom setup. So I'm curious at this point, I'd like to pause and ask any of you in the chat, or if you are brave enough to unmic yourself, have you found yourself adapting any of these things during the pandemic, or are you considering doing so moving forward?
Barbara here from Muskegon Community College, and my classes went from face-to-face to synchronous, and next term I'm going to have some classes, one class that will be face-to-face, but because of fears, I am going to go ahead and offer an option for people to join online via Zoom in the class if they want. And I found that a lot of my students appreciate flexible due dates because of issues, and I have more students in classes because of the synchronous option, but opening up due dates for them or being flexible to their needs has created a better sense of engagement in my courses.
Thank you for sharing that. I also see that Gina has put into the chat flexing due dates with a triple exclamation point. Yeah, that's excellent. I see Linda Lee has said, I don't have regular office hours. I deal with each student on demand. I also ask them to have a session when they need it. And then Alana has said, considering the set office hours online. Justin has chimed in, I have been giving asynchronous options for students who can't attend in person for whatever reason, though I don't stream the class because a lot of the active learning I do is face-to-face.
This is Michelle Denham from Mott. I teach English. I'm teaching face-to-face and online versions of the same course this semester. And so in planning my face-to-face course, I synced it up to my online course. It used to be that I would try to build my online course off of my face-to-face courses, right? But I did the reverse to keep them really doing the same things every week. So there are video versions that I've created for my online students of things that I'm covering in person in my face-to-face classes that I make available to face-to-face students. If there's anything points bearing happening in the classroom, like a in-class discussion or something, I create an online alternative assignment so students can do a journal entry on Canvas instead. And that's actually working out well, even for students who are in the classroom but just don't want to talk. I keep track of who contributes to the discussion, and if they don't speak, they get assigned the alternative thing and then they do that. And so I'm hearing from them.
That's really excellent, Michelle. Thank you for sharing that. And what a great way, I think, to make your own work as the instructor more efficient. We've got another comment in the chat from Candace. I have offered optional 30-minute weekly sessions to help students move through skills, assignments, concerns. They are recorded, so students can always check them out later. However, I find that lots of them join in with our weekly huddle. Oh, that is really excellent. And I love the idea of recording, you know, your 30-minute sessions with students so they can reflect back on that as well. All right, well, these are really lovely things. And what I want to point out, just from everything that participants just shared, is I wouldn't say that any of those necessarily, go as far as to fit into the definition of high flex. High flex is this big topic right now, and I think it can be a really stressful topic for faculty, especially if they lack, the resources and the tech in their classrooms to make that happen. But clearly, from the small discussion we just had, there's a lot of different ways that you can flex your course in a way that is, a better experience for your students and not overwhelming for you as the faculty member. So you all gave a lot of great examples. I wanted to just provide one from our Moodle LMS. And so this is an example from a main Moodle course page of a flipped classroom. And any of you who are doing this are likely to be familiar that in a flipped classroom, you are providing assignments and instructions for students to complete ahead of time, so that when they do come to class, whether your class is face-to-face, synchronous, or some type of combination, you're going to have some very specific outcomes for that time in class together. And so this is a case where there are some readings and some exercises that students are going to complete in a Spanish course before they come to class. I find foreign language teachers are one group especially who really have needed this flipped classroom setup since the emergency moved to remote and throughout the pandemic. At this point, I'm going to pass it over to Sean.
All right, thank you. So continuing with this conversation, we're talking first about the synchronous part of online tools that we can use in the classroom. So of course, this is going to include things like we're doing right now. We're here in a virtual conferencing software, or VCS, I like to call it, like Zoom, Google Meet, WebEx, Connect, Collaborate, Big Blue Button. This is something that all of us have done at some point in time during the pandemic, no doubt. But we probably know some of these very basic benefits of some of these things, like, you have your audio and video that we're seeing right here. You have text chat that we're doing right there, which is great. Breakout rooms. We're not going to do breakout rooms in this example, but those are some great things you do in a classroom itself. Wonderful for giving presentations, and of course, doing polling and things like that. But we also want to talk briefly about other things you can potentially do, such as using like just chat outside of this, like in your LMS or instant messaging, for example. And this might just be basic text chat. So we already got a little bit of examples. For example, Barbara was talking last time about how and it's not exactly like Jess was saying, it's not exactly describing HyFlex in a HyFlex course where you might have for any session, they could come either in person or online, or potentially even see a recording, and they get that choice of what they're doing with it. It might be that we're doing this for a couple courses, or maybe if a student's sick, you might be able to work out something with that student for it. So you don't have to worry about all the students doing that for those sorts of things. So if anyone else has any other ideas or if you've done this, you thought, well, this works great, or maybe if you thought you tried it and it didn't work great, we can even hear about that too. Maybe we can hear from one person if they want to unmute themselves and give a quick example of if this worked good or did not work well for them. They tried to do in a regular face-to-face class. Looks like it worked well for everybody. Well, when you're thinking about this, go ahead and you can put something in the chat with it here. We'll show a quick screenshot of this. And this is, of course, we're seeing Zoom like we have it right now. If you've never done breakout rooms in Zoom, they're kind of nice. You can set it up to move participants there automatically, or they can choose their own room. And it's a nice way to sort of break up what you're doing inside of the class. Again, we're not going to do it for this right now for this presentation, but for certain ones we have done it, and it works really well. If you do things like, typical like think, pair, shares, or breaking students into groups and going on about it, that can work really well. So again, as we're going through this, Barbara says loves breakout rooms. So if you think of some things, put it through chat. Again, we like to hear things that worked, but also if you had questions with things that didn't work, feel free to bring that up here. This is a safe place. Maybe you, Jess, and I can even have some ideas, or your colleagues, as we go through that part of it. So next we'll talk about the asynchronous part of it. So this is, you have your regular face-to-face class, but outside of the class, you might have things like in your LMS or learning management system, like forums, discussion boards, things like that. So some of the ways that we use these are for like a questions and answer form, right? At the beginning of class, maybe at the very top of it, where we say, here is, you have these different questions, ask it and anyone can ask those different questions there. Or it could be things like a student lounge. This is just a social thing. Students want to talk a little bit about it, get to know each other, share movie quotes and things like that to try to build some of that community. That's really important in an online class, but even in a face-to-face class, you may think that I don't really have a lot of time for my students to talk, depending on how it's set up. Or we've found that just because of the pandemic, they have their masks, they're coming to class early, depending how your university does it, or they're not coming to class too early. You might not have a lot of that social things that happen before and after class that we used to have. There's a quick question here. Any easy solution for students who get themselves booted out of the Zoom while trying to break out of it? So that's always the trickiest part. I would say, and we even saw that with our Keynote, right? The virtual conferencing software has the most things that could go wrong live with it. And it's going to depend on a lot of things, their internet connection, depending on what they're using, if their software is up to date. The best advice we can have is to have them try to be at some stable internet connection. Sometimes students might be like on a wireless, or maybe trying to use their phone, maybe even an LTE, and not even that. And that can make it tricky to do. So that's the best thing we can do. Try to get them to join in advance. If we're doing something like this, like we have Zoom or Google Meet where they can do it on their own. So if it's their first time, we can say, here's a test session, try it before we have our actual live session. It's not going to guarantee there's no issues there, but that's some of the things that we've tried before. Yeah, what was that other question you saw there, Jess?
How easy is it to set up breakout rooms?
It's fairly easy. It depends on what you're using. Each one does it a little differently, but usually, so we're not a moderator in this, so I can't show the actual buttons itself, but usually there's a button down at the bottom, and most of them will have two types of options where you can just randomly assign students, say breakout rooms of 3 people, for example, or you can let them choose their own rooms, so you can say who's in the room. But if you're just saying, well, let's just break it out into random rooms, usually it's just a couple clicks on that. If you're an Oakland University person, we're happy to help you out. But I'm sure the tech people at your institution will probably have different workshops, like Jess and Nick in our university lead different workshops on this as well. So back to the forum. So we have different announcements forums we do and class discussions that we'll do. So these are ways, I'm sure you use these forums before and have different ways for it. There's other ways that we've used this. So Team Space using Slack, Teams, Discord, and GroupMe. I'll give you a little bit of our behind the scenes magic. Jess and I are actually using Slack right now. And I'm hitting N and enter on my keyboard, or P or previous for her to advance the slides. So we're not going next slide. Not that you can't do that, right? But it's just sort of a little behind the scenes magic. But we use Slack with our team all the time. And we have colleagues that use it with their classes or something. If you don't have Slack, you might have Teams, Discord, GroupMe, something like that. So this is something that's great for the students to use. It's something that's nice for the faculty to use, to be able to go in there. You can even use it with colleagues, things like that. If anyone's using some of these, you can mention that in the chat and sort of your experiences with this. We really like them at our end. And of course, the classic social media things like Twitter or Facebook groups. This is still used quite a bit to help kind of carry that conversation on outside of the classroom. So go ahead, and if you have, we'll show you a quick picture here, example, but if you have some examples of these, throw them into chat. You can talk a little bit about that there. You'll see just a picture of some of our different forums we have. This is our actual ELIS or e-learning instructional support department. This is our actual team Slack. We have a random channel where we kind of get a little bit of weird topics on here. You'll see a lot of the different channels that we have. But it's been great for our department, and these can be very helpful for classes too. Like we have an example here about using them for class discussions. So which one of these are easiest to join? Tony asks. They're all pretty similar. All of these ones, like, well, I shouldn't say, it depends on what your university has. So for example, your university might have Microsoft, it might be a Microsoft university and have everything built in. So Teams might be built into your university. And in that case, that's probably gonna be the easiest one for students to join because they won't need an outside account, for example. But if not, they're gonna use some basic outside account where they just put in their email address and it's, they can do it fairly straightforward in just a couple of seconds. They'll get in there and you just put in a name and a password and get in. So they're not, in my mind, they're not too tricky. I'm, of course, a terrible person to ask because I've been working in technology for 20 years. But I think they're fairly easy to use, and a lot of our professors will have a lot of success with the students doing that as well. Usually students are doing these like Slack or Discord a lot on their own already, so they're familiar with that sorts of things. We do have some faculty will say, well, what are you guys using? If they say, oh, we're all using Discord, they can create a new channel on there for them for example. All right, so we're going to also talk about capturing the lecture, getting this going inside of the actual classroom itself. And we've had some people talking about this too, which has been nice. And so what we mean by this type of thing is like lecture capture software, Panopto, Yuja, Kaltura, Echo 360. There's a lot of different ones that your institution might be working. And these will do, of course, a lot of different things. Like, of course, they're great for reviewing coursework. Or if you miss a session, if you're sick, it's a terrible weather, maybe in Michigan. We've all heard about how this is helpful for not just regular students, but if you haven't known this, like English language learners, it's very helpful for them. They can go through and they say, all right, I'm learning this. It helps me with getting that language on there. But really, all students, there's many studies that show they benefit from this because it does things like you can do note taking during it. You can go back and review things that are happening. It has captions that you can turn on during it. So these are wonderful things to have. And most institutions will have it so that it's fairly simple to set up in the classroom, where it's almost a one button. You click it, you start, and it goes, and it starts recording on there. There's, of course, other ways to do this, like creating videos for your courses. This is something that you do not necessarily during when the course is happening, but something you might do before the course is happening. So this might be something like a course orientation video you do. I've done different things like Meet the Professor video. It's really good for weekly overviews, or really if you're just trying to cover like tricky material and making sure you're going over that. So I'll stop here for a second. Has anyone done anything like this? You can type in the chat, or if you want to bring up your microphone and talk, where you recorded your lecture, you found it beneficial, or you just created a video, even if it's for a face-to-face class, but you put it on your LMS, they can watch later, and had good success with it. And while we're waiting for that to come in, I'll show you an example image of here's some of the things I've done, like my Meet the Professor video. I used to have some very long hair. Like if I turn my video off here, this is my pandemic look. And so I like to just make fun of myself. I have a stormtrooper armor that I have there because I'm a very geeky guy. So here's me dancing around my office with that when I do the Meet the Professor video, that sort of thing.
I like to tell Sean that he became the Bob Ross of the e-list department during the pandemic. I'm fairly sad that he cut his hair, quite frankly. So I'm seeing some excellent comments in the chat, and I wanted to just underline something Sean said, because we are sort of mentioning a lot of different tool options for the different types of teaching strategies that you might be using. And a lot of times the supported software at your university is often going to be the best one, especially for troubleshooting and you and your students having a place to go to when something doesn't go according to plans. So just something to consider. So at this point, we've talked about synchronous sessions, asynchronous sessions. Keep those comments coming in the chat. We're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about how we all use our LMS at our given institution. So specifically, at least in my experience previously, and I did sort of primarily teach face-to-face at one time. And what I remember from those days long back is that we were used to thinking of our syllabus as sort of the master document for our courses. And, you know, of course, we've all seen the memes and the comments in our shared like instructor social media channels. You know, some of us would show up to class with a t-shirt that would say it's on the syllabus, or some with a little sign, you know, oh, every time a student has a question, it's on the syllabus. But certainly while we want to have, you know, sort of that main document of a syllabus, when we switch to a synchronous, asynchronous, you know, some type of flexible, blended, hybrid mindset, we have to start thinking beyond just that syllabus as a main document. And really the most helpful place we think to put, you know, all of these other, you know, things would be our LMS, you know, system for our main course pages. So absolutely that syllabus is probably one of the first items at the top of your main course page that you should have. But hopefully already you have pivoted to also posting things like your course handouts or any of your other lecture materials that would include video. We just had a great discussion about that. Assignment instructions. This is something that I still notice a lot of the faculty we work with overlooking. They have done an excellent job of putting their assignment instructions and frankly also the grading criteria or rubrics in their syllabus. But at this point in, you know, the current setting, it's really quite a pain for students to have to go back to the syllabus document every single time. Some of you, I know some of you have a syllabus that might be 10, 20, 30 pages. And that's a lot of material to go through to try and find the specific instructions and grading information for a given assignment throughout the semester. And so I really talk to those faculty about, yes, keep them in your syllabus, but also, you know, copy and paste those into the description information, you know, in your LMS assignment tool or in that particular week. That way it is mirrored from the syllabus and, you know, to that particular week, that particular assignment. This can cut down on a lot of confusion, a lot of, you know, confusing emails or even posts in your question and answer forum, you know, that, you know, could be very simple to solve. So a lot of us do, besides creating our own videos, create third-party videos, use third-party videos, or maybe our department asks us to use certain third-party videos as well as external websites. And so it's really excellent to keep all of those, you know, links posted and available within your learning management system. And so especially in some type of chronological order where students know based on the date or the particular week what they're going to have to use for that week. And so this is a quick example of our Moodle course homepage. I often include even some type of subheader where I'm going to, in one section of that week, have all the specific readings or course materials. And then what is not showed in this page further down would be something like the specific activities that students are going to need it for. I often will include a specific page, and this might be in a written format or it would be in a video format, some type of weekly orientation. These materials or course, handouts that you have, you're going to use them for these specific activities, whether they are asynchronous or synchronous in the course. It can all be in one place. And while we want it to remain consistent with our course syllabus, we can't just think of the syllabus anymore as that single, main document that we expect students to go back to, potentially hundreds of times throughout a semester, depending on, how many things we're doing in our course. And so I see a great comment in the chat by Dr. Janet Anthony. I have set class videos pre-labeled under must-watch videos as a module. And this is another great point too, that often within the LMS, there are things you can set up, such as activity completion, where students can only access, the next thing once they've done, whatever they needed to read previously. And so in the screenshot I've included under each, item, there's this little gray box that says view. And so once the student has actually clicked on that item, that view is going to switch to done, and students can keep track of what they have looked at already, where they are at in the course, those types of things. So there's a lot of really helpful features that are available to us typically within our LMS that, we didn't use or have previously in only a face-to-face setting, or, when we considered our LMS course page, as supplementary somehow. Linda Lee said, my first module is class resources. So resources are always there to be accessed on demand. I think that's really excellent for the resources they are going to need on a weekly basis. They're not just going to need it in 1 week, but they're going to need it most weeks. The syllabus would fall into that category, or maybe, a link to a textbook, something like that. I think that's a really excellent point.
What I'd be interested in, if people could type in the chat here, have you, was just an example she gave there for different things you could put in your learning management system like Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas. Have any of you changed the way you've done your face-to-face course now based on this? Just, you can put, we won't do the microphones for this one, but just quickly put in the chat if you have, like, for example, my face-to-face course looks almost like my online course now. So if you have changed it in some way, even if it's just that, could be a tiny thing, like I add my syllabus there now or whatever else, just let us know how in the chat what you've done with that.
Yeah, it's a really excellent question, Sean. Yeah, and we've seen even previously, we heard some mention of, really trying to make more of our courses blended. If we have one online section, one in-person section, really cuts down on the work for us. And the last thing I would say is on this particular point is that the more you have in your LMS main course page prior to the semester, the less work for you later on if you do have to pivot, right? If we do have another emergency closing and your class was face-to-face, something like that. So we've learned maybe a little bit to be, proactive versus reactive. All right, keep those comments in. I'm going to switch to only a slightly different topic, very tangential, which is about collecting assignments. And so at this point too, even before I talk about the items on the slide, I want to ask, are you or do you know any colleagues in your department or your institution who are still accepting assignments over email or perhaps printed out, handing them in a paper format?
If you are, or someone, you don't have to out yourself, if someone, click on the reactions down at the bottom, give us like a thumbs up. If you are that person or someone. Just looking to get a general idea, click on reactions and a little thumbs up if that's your preference or you have a colleague that likes that.
Seeing some thumbs. I'm seeing at least one yes in the chat. Yeah, and so it may not surprise you, Sean and I are big proponents of collecting assignments in the LMS the same way that you are posting all of your materials. And we think there's a number of benefits that go along with this. So as we've already been discussing, hopefully in your LMS, you have a regular practice of, organizing things in some type of chronological order so that, students can look at their LMS page and see for this particular assignment, what class does this need to be turned into, and specifically what week or what date. A lot of LMS also provide the option to restrict by file type and due date. This is a huge help for me because I'm a PC user, and especially when I used to teach in those writing and rhetoric courses where I was having students turn in papers. A lot of my Mac users would try to turn in a file that was a .pages, which is not a file type that I could open, at least at the time, as a PC user. I don't think that's changed, and so I could, when I set up the assignment, I could say specifically, these are the types of file types I can accept. And these are the types that I can't. So if you didn't know that, I would highly recommend that you consider utilizing that. That works great too if you're teaching some type of art class and you only want to accept files that are an image, or same thing for a video, whatever the case may be. Again, this can cut down on a lot of confusion or those emails with the student of like, oh, I turned it in, professor, and you're like, I'm seeing something completely different here. This is a picture of your Aunt Sally. That was not the assignment. So in addition, we've already talked about having the instructions in the same place. Another thing that can really cut down on the confusion of a student turning in the wrong item for the particular assignment. No longer do you need to go in, see that it's the wrong thing, contact the student, etc. They will have a better idea directly from those embedded instructions what they should be turning in. And so this is really efficient for your time management too. Those of you who are already doing this know, a lot of times this means that all the assignments are in one place. You're not having to look in the cloud or your, physical mailbox on campus or your email box through your university. And usually you can just download them all in a zip file, open them up, grade them, and send them back. A lot of times we do have some clear, reporting connected to all of those assignments. It's very convenient for us to look at. And it's also more direct or clear how we should be messaging students who may have not remembered to submit. Grading, a lot of you pre-pandemic or even currently might really prefer continuing to mark up, papers physically. A lot of us really enjoy that about our job. But at least in Moodle, we do have that same ability to mark it up in the online setting directly within our LMS. Hopefully yours can too. And then hopefully you also have a lot of different ways you can leave comments. Moodle allows us to even leave audio comments as well as written. Glancing over to the chat here, Linda Lee said, I would be curious to hear from other Canvas users. Do you organize by modules or by pages with links? That's a really great question, and certainly, something that we can talk about that might be specific to your course. What is best to do? I encourage anyone who's a Canvas user to respond to Linda Lee in the chat. And so I'm curious for those of you who gave that thumbs up or maybe reported in, do you think if your colleagues or perhaps yourself knew about any of these features, do you think it would be convincing enough for those people to leave their old preferred ways behind and consider collecting assignments in the LMS in the future?
I see some people getting up and slamming the door in fury. That's good. That
That's
lady's giving us the finger. Perfect. You can let us know in chat too.
Yeah, let us know in the chat. I would encourage you to be those advocates, those proponents, with your colleagues. Hopefully, the response is not to slam the door in your face. So this is just a quick example of an assignment in our LMS. This probably looks very similar to what you're doing if you are already undergoing this practice. So you can see this is a reflection assignment. We've got the instructions directly in here, including things like a word count. What are they responding to? And in this case, we've even included some rubric information about how the grading is going to be done for this assignment. All right, and so at this point, I think this is our last topic before we open it up to general comments and questions. Sean had a great discussion about, collaboration and communication during synchronous, asynchronous courses. And so this is a little bit of an extension of that. Methods for communication or for collaboration, which typically involves communication. We get a lot of questions from our faculty, as we sort of saw here already. What are some of the best ways to ask students to collaborate on those class or group projects? And so we like to recommend collaboration spaces at Open University. We are a Google Workplace institution, but outside of that, we really like a tool like Trello, which is great for project management. We'll have an example of that in a moment. And then when it comes to information sharing, in addition to the tools we've already talked about, which might have been, a forum or instant messaging or texting or social media, things like that. Don't forget to screen recorders. So there are some great easy tools like Loom and Jing that you can use very quickly, where students, when they are collaborating, or even you with your faculty, sometimes you just want, to send a quick video message. And so these are great for doing that. And it saves a lot of time instead of sometimes doing that, written messaging. So if you haven't heard of those, we encourage you to take a look at them. And then in terms of scheduling, there are great tools like Doodle or Google Calendar. Again, if you happen to be a Google Workplace user, of course, Office has tools like this as well. And then, of course, as we've already mentioned, chat, instant messaging, these things work great, as well as video conferencing. We, in fact, at our institution, took all of these ideas and we actually put them together into a single student remote collaboration document. And so we include links, basic descriptions and explanations. We talk about which ones are supported by our university and which ones aren't. And so any faculty who asks us about this, we have this document available for them with these ideas. I see some other great suggestions in the chat, such as by Barbara with Calendly. There's a lot of great tools out there nowadays. And then Linda Lee said, might you be willing to share that document link with us? Yes, we'd be happy to do that. Once we move to the question and answer, I'd be happy to go get that link and post it so you can see that example. All right, here's just a quick look at Trello. For those of you who have never heard of this tool before, I also like it because it's extremely visual. So to give you an idea of what you're seeing here, we've got some different columns and you can customize these columns for the different stages of your project. So this is a Trello board that we are using for some of our online course design and development. So this is not the entire board, but this is just a couple of our first columns for early stages in planning. And then once the course is in development, when it might be up for review. And you can see we've put various different items here. If you are familiar with the concept of a Kanban board, I do think of it as sort of an easy tool for that type of project management. So if you're interested in this, take a look. I think it's a great way to organize projects. And if you are using other tools that we haven't mentioned, please put them into the chat as well. And at this point, I think we'd like to continue the conversation for the remainder of our time to see and hear more about what you are doing and answer any final questions.
And you can
grab that
type. Oh, sorry. You could type that in, or you can unmute your microphone. We have a little bit of time here. Let us know if anything here, and we'd like to hear, even if you have some questions on this or some negatives that we can help you work through, or some things you think you might do differently. Just let us know. We have a little bit of time here before lunch.
Just one question. How can you possibly make voice over PowerPoints be more engaging in any way? Or, I can't think, but students keep telling me they listen to voiceover, many times, but they still can't grasp content. Is there a way to get them engaged with the PowerPoints?
I can answer that question. Sean, do you want me to take that one first? So Yeah, I really love the idea of, along with the PowerPoint presentation, there is audio. What our IDSHAP has been doing with our faculty is we have actually been either exporting or recording those. With PowerPoint with audio, it is fairly simple to export that actually to an MP4 video format. And so it will, completely take, all of your slides and the amount of audio you have for each one. But then from there, you might take that new video file of, your audio and PowerPoint and add some type of interactivity. And so, with the tools we have available at Open University, such as Panopto and Yuja, we can add some, embedded questions. Basically, you might think of them as knowledge checks, so that as students are going through your PowerPoint presentation, the video is going to stop at a certain time, and a quick knowledge check question might come up for that main takeaway or something like that they need to answer before they continue going. And I think that's a great way to add interactivity. Sean, I think I've seen you do this. Do you have any stories about that or other ideas?
Yeah. So, and also with Maureen saying the Meet the Professor video, I even do it in that. And during that video, I do 2 takes. I do one with me there, and then I go jump into my Stormtrooper armor and I pretend like I'm kidnapping myself. It's a lot of ridiculous fun. The biggest thing I try to do is just make it interesting. I'm a goofy guy, so not everyone is sort of as clownish as I am. But I'll try that. But even if you're not that type of personality, like Jess is saying, what I'll try to do is put some of those questions in there. So if you don't have something like Yuja, Camtasia is something you can get for fairly cheap, and you can put the questions in there with it. And just something like that where you can have the students interact. I get a lot of positive feedback from my students from it, even if they're not wildly exciting questions. And what I'll try to even do is put like a multiple choice and have 3 things and then like 1 silly one on there just to make it silly. And they'll even comment how that just makes it a tiny bit fun. And I really don't have to even try hard for that. It's just almost ridiculous stuff that I put in there. But I try to keep it fairly short. I think about, would I want to watch this video? Would this be dry to me? Can I try to do things with my voice to make it sound a little more engaging, that sort of thing? But again, it is a little bit more of a showmanship or presentation in that way. Any other questions or comments before we head into lunch?
I just wanted to say I did put our doc into the chat, and it is set to any on the internet with this link can view. But if you're still having trouble with it and you'd like to see the document, send us an email and I'd be happy to make sure that you get it.
Catherine's asking about, do we need to assign points to discussion boards to get meaningful participation? That's an interesting and very tricky question. I think it really depends a lot on what you have set up for your class, the students. You're going to get a lot more participation from graduates and undergraduate, I would say, just as a general rule for classes and things like that. And so I try to have the forums be worth something, even if they're not a giant amount, for some sort of class participation with there. And there's also a whole art to what you're asking on forums in terms of trying to get that discussion going. We don't have a whole lot of time to really talk about that here, but that can be a session in itself of making good questions or discussion posts and things like that for students in forums, not just, what is your definition of accounting? And you just have 15 different things there or something like that. So you have to think a little bit more about that. What I like to try to do is have students, I'll ask part of the question or have students break into groups and research things, maybe look at part of what they're doing for that part of, section of the course there, and have them build up a little bit of that, where you can build in a lot of different ideas for that.
Yeah, that really could be its own topic. I agree with Sean that especially at the undergraduate level, keeping it low stakes, but offering, a few carrots in the form of points, does a lot in addition to the other things Sean mentioned.
Well, hopefully we've given you all some things to think about. We've all lived through this wild pandemic, and I say through it as if it's done, which is not. But hopefully, really what we wanted to do is just draw your attention to some of the great things that maybe yourself or some of your colleagues have been doing during the pandemic, and what are some things that you can continue to do as you move forward with it. So we appreciate that. We'll stick around for just a couple more minutes if anyone has any questions. But otherwise, enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you in the afternoon.
Absolutely. We'd love to hear from you. Feel free to send us an email.
All right, everyone. Well, we're going to get started here. My name's Gary Brand. I'm the Executive Director of ETOM, and I'm going to be the quiet, silent moderator behind the scenes watching the chat. We're going to record this session. We want to welcome back Bonnie Stahoviak to do a keynote workshop. So you all heard the intro already this morning. I'm going to be quiet and let her take it away.
Thank you so much. And thanks to those of you that are returning from the session that I did earlier today. And to those of you that maybe weren't able to make that, but are here for this session now, I'm excited to be able to spend some more time with everyone. And this is what I hope to be an interactive session. We're looking at translating our intentions into action. And just like this morning's session, I have a resources page. The link for this one is a little bit different than the earlier link. This is at teachinginhighered.com/etom21. And could someone put that in the chat so we can get that out to everybody as well? So teachinginhighered.com/etom21. And if you miss it this time around or additional people join us, I'll be bringing this up at the end as well. And in case you weren't here this morning, this has my slide deck with the resources that are mentioned. And then I actually already was able to do it from this morning's session. If you add things to the chat, resources you want us to be aware of, things that have worked well for you, that's really the beautiful thing of a community like this, is that we can share those things and I'm able to quickly go up after the session and be able to add your contribution. So please feel free in the chat as I go through sharing what's worked for me. And I'm excited to hear what's worked for you, what's not working, and be able to have this as a conversation together. And speaking of what works for us, I actually have written a book about personal productivity. And just like so many of us that work in educational technology, it's one of those things where people think, oh, because you work in educational technology or you have a background in that, then you must never suffer technological problems yourself. You all witnessed me having technological problems, so you already know that that's not true. You know that yourself, you've had technological problems. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to personal productivity. People get this impression of me that I have it all together and all our systems are in tip-top shape. And if that were ever true, which all of our systems are never in tip-top shape, it's so easy, even when we think we have it together, for something to throw us off so easily. I was mentioning, as some of you were joining, that we've got one of our children here homesick today. And of course, that can really throw off where you had these plans, you had all these systems in place, and then things can kind of get thrown out the window. So I want to be encouraging all of us as I share some stories, and they're not just my stories. They're stories of a lot of people that have navigated these kinds of things and have found some things that work. I'll be sharing some research as well. I'd like to encourage you to shrink it all down in your mind. And at the end of this session, I'm going to be inviting us to have a conversation, not about all the things that we could be doing. It's not about aiming for perfection. I encourage you to just identify one thing that you might take out of our conversation today that you could begin to experiment with and try. Because the problem is when we let things become too big and we get perfectionistic or we have too high of aspirations, it's too easy to then say, well, none of this is going to work for me. I can't do it. And we get into this guilt and we get into this shame that's really not helpful for living our lives in very productive ways. So you're going to see me going a lot practical here, but also wanting to remind us that just because things are practical, they're not always doable if we try to do too many of them at the same time. So I'm actually going to take the same poll that I took earlier this morning. So if you were there, you'll remember it. It's a poll that has to do with cats. This session, I got a couple cats and dogs things. So I'm going to take this poll. I'm going to put a chance for you to respond in the chat. And you can also respond at pollev.com/DRBS. This is, again, if you were there this morning, the same poll that I took, and we're just going to see if anything has changed between this morning and now. And I actually have saved an image of what this morning's looked like. So now I guess on a scale of cat, how are you feeling later in the day is the question now. So, and it might be the same as you felt this morning, or you might feel a little bit different now after your time at ETOM and whatever else has been going on with your day. So again, that is in the chat. And also you could join at polev.com/DRBS. And let's have a look at our cats and see if anything has changed. And if you were around this morning and you recall this, would you mind sharing in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself, anything that you notice is different now from how this morning's looked, if you recall? I would have seen a slight difference. I don't know if you are too. In the chat or aloud.
I picked number 8, but partly because I hadn't even had a time to brush my hair before we started. But now I'm a lot more alert and motivated.
Yeah. So that's one thing I'm noticing too. That was the same thing too. There were a lot more 8s this morning. Yes. A lot more 8s. Anything you notice from this morning that's different, or for you personally, or that you're noticing collectively is different for us, a group? I'm noticing fewer 8s, although still, that's not a great day. Look, the number 8 cat. Any other differences you're noticing? I don't think we had anyone that was number 1. Number 1 kind of looks like they're ready to pounce, perhaps in a good way. I'm also seeing a lot more number 7s. Kind of that reflective look. I don't know if I'm interpreting too much out of the cat. And by the way, this little question that I'm asking you is part of a thread. I'm going to put it in the chat. And then I'm also going to let you know that it's on that resources page that I just showed you. This is a tweet, and you don't have to belong to Twitter, by the way, to read tweets. And it's from someone named Dr. V.G. Sathi. And she put together a whole thread of different kinds of icebreakers, which I don't even like the word icebreaker, but that's what most of us recognize them as, that we can do as people are joining either in person or online synchronous classes. So that you'll see this as one of many of the examples that she gave there. So that's a fun thread to go have a look at. And again, it's on that resources page as well. I find it really helpful to sometimes have music playing, whether it's again in a classroom or online, or to have these kinds of ways for people to be able to interact. Yeah, and I loved that thread of hers. It kept growing and growing. So we're looking at how to translate our intentions into action. And we know that for the next hour or so, we're going to be looking for just one thing, not 37 things, but just one thing that we might do in order to put some of this into practice, to experiment with, to think more about, etc. And I reflect often back to a conversation I had with someone named Rebecca Hogue on episode 149 of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast. And she's someone who faced a life with cancer and has written a lot about this and done some study and attempted to give voice and face to the illness experience. And whether or not, like we talked about this morning, any of you might be facing mental health challenges, whether or not we might be facing a lot of difficulties, having conversations about productivity tends to be somewhat triggering for people in the sense of feeling that guilt, feeling that shame. I'm not doing this right. And I try to remind myself, let alone other people, this is, my first pandemic, probably your first pandemic too. And that I find that so many times what we really need to tell ourselves, and I invite, us to be thinking about how gentle we need to be with ourselves. And I'm actually teaching a class right now on personal leadership and productivity, and finding this is important to stress to students as well, to be gentle with themselves, that this is not about aiming for perfection. When we start talking about productivity, we're not going to have it all together. Yet there are approaches that can help reduce some of that stress. And one of the things that Rebecca talked about with regard to her experience with cancer was that she found it, and so many others that she spoke and to as well, in their illness experience, or if you've suffered a great trauma or some kind of grieving, is how even a question like, how are you, is too much sometimes. And so she prefers, and I know a lot of others prefer, how are you today? And you notice that I started out earlier how are you even just later today? And thanks for sharing about your coffee experience. Just sitting down this morning, for some of you now, a little bit later in your day, you've been able to ground yourself in caffeine and also just this mindset, hopefully, of learning and building community. And recently I came across a rather funny way, it's an internet meme, if you will, that some people, kind of like Groundhog Day is deciding how much longer winter is going to last. So there is a dog out there that some people in the internet are using to predetermine how their days are going to go. And so I'm going to play just 1 minute of a video that will introduce you to a dog named Noodle. And Noodles is a dog that, well, you'll see. Again, many people will ask Noodle the question, is it going to be a bones or a no bones kind of a day? And if that doesn't make any sense to you, it will shortly after you get a chance to meet Bones. And after I introduce you or reintroduce some of you to Bones, I can see some of you already know who Bones is. I'll show a 1 minute clip of even some songs that have been written about this dog that have came about the internet. So here's a brief introduction. I'm not going to play the whole 2 minutes. I'll just play about a minute of it, but a brief introduction or reintroduction to Noodles and how we can tell if we're having a bones or no bones kind of a day.
Introducing
You really have to put that away, sir.
the pug prognosticator who has tongues wagging, Noodle, the 13-year-old dog tickling funny bones with his bones or no bones pronouncements.
Oh my gosh, there are bones today. Okay, all right, you know what that means. Treat yourself today.
But please, no bones to pick on those mornings when the opposite happens.
That was some of us
When
this
Noodle
morning.
flops, so can you, using him as an excuse.
Hey Liz, I'm so sorry. I actually don't have bones, and I can't meet you and your crappy boyfriend for a drink after work.
Ever since Jonathan Graziano adopted Noodle almost 6 years ago,
Noodle calls the shots.
Noodle makes it clear if he's not ready to get up in the morning.
He would just go completely boneless and he would just flop on me.
Now the internet is taking its cues from a 23-pound pug on whether it's going to be a bones day
Standing like a deep-rooted tree.
or a no bones day.
Oh, a soft collapse.
Followers are putting their fate in Noodle's bones.
Do I believe in astrology? No. Do I believe in that dog? Yes.
They're making no bones about singing Noodle's praises.
If it's a no bones day, I just stay in bed. Noodle said it's fine if I don't get dressed. His legs are made of jello.
At a colonial museum in Trenton, New Jersey, Noodle rules.
Pack it in, David. We're done for the day.
What? Why?
Don't worry about that. It's a no bones day.
Oh.
You'd expect pillow talk from his New York City owner, enraptured with Noodle.
And you want to talk about going off the deep end, like we're there.
But with over 1.7 million followers,
Oh, and he's feeling jazzed.
seems like everyone's going off the deep end.
Noodle said that it
I believe that I saw in the chat that today is a Bones Day. So it sounds like some of you are up on this particular trend. And now I get to play for you even a song that has been, actually a series of songs that have been written about Noodles the pug. So just a quick 1 minute video to keep going on our getting to know Noodles the pug songs, and we can confirm in the chat if this is indeed a Bones Day.
If it's a no bones day, I just stay in bed. Noodle said it's fine if I don't get dressed. His legs are made of jello. Sorry you didn't get the memo, cause Noodle said that it was okay. Noodle said that it was quite alright if I don't leave my house all night. It's a no bones day.
There once was a pug that could foresee if our day ahead was merry or bleak. Every day all of TikTok asked,
is it a bones day or no? Noodle the pug so cute, for our mental health we look to you. Oh, it's a no bones day, so back into bed we go.
Mr. Noodle, do you have bones?
Oh, please have bones.
I need to know if it's safe to leave home.
Puggy.
And should I ask for that big promotion?
Young Puggy.
To Noodle wisdom I give all devotion. Noodle, please stand up straight.
Pug.
If you ain't got bones, my whole day's a waste.
Ah, damn.
Send me Noodle prophecy. Noodle, have a bones day for me.
All right. Thanks to Noodles for this reminder that some days we have bones days and some days we have no bones days. And my hope after we finish our time together is that we might think through some of the ways to increase our likelihood of having a better day and how to have systems in place that can increase our likelihood of doing that. And thanks for engaging me on the bones and no bones conversation. I'm glad to know some of you know about this. I only just discovered, I think I might be late to the bones party. All right, I want to invite you to have some reflection, and please continue in the chat as you have been. I'd like you to reflect on what the different roles are that you play in your life. I've already mentioned to you today, we've got a son at home today who is 9 and not feeling well. We weren't planning on that, obviously. And so the role that I play right now is mother. I am also a partner. I am a teacher. I am a leader. And so I want you to think about some of those roles that you play, maybe identify 4 or 5 of them. If you would type them in the chat, if you're comfortable sharing 4 to 5 roles that you play in your life, in your daily life. And oftentimes these roles are where the tensions come in when it has to do with our productivity systems. So in the chat, feel free to share the different roles that you play in your life, 4 to 5 of them. I'm sure you play more than 4 to 5, but yeah. I'm seeing grandparent, coach, academic advisor, spouse, friend, caregiver, volunteer, church member, horse trainer, doggy mom. Rhonda, did you know about bones before today? That's the real question. Dental hygienist, trustee, cat daddy, Wonder Woman, professor, mentor. Yeah, I'll share a few of the roles that I play, and please feel free to keep going in the chat there. Some of the other roles I'm seeing come in: performer, coordinator, everything solver person. Love that, Denise. So some of the roles, if you were at this morning's session, you already know this about me, but I'm a dean at my institution. I'm the dean of teaching and learning. So what that translates to me is I get to lead our faculty development efforts. Also, student success falls under me. So our academic resource center, we have a supplemental instruction program, disability services, and our library. I am also a podcaster and a writer, although you notice I don't put the writer up there. I still feel sometimes more of a podcaster than a writer, but I do have a column that I post on in the EdSurge. And I also wrote a book, which I'm sharing a little bit about today. And then really what I feel so much at my heart is a teacher, and I'm a professor of business, and I mostly teach classes in leadership and management. That's my academic background. The book that I wrote is called The Productive Online and Offline Professor. People often think that I wrote a book about how to teach online. That's actually not what the book is about. The book was something I had always wanted to write in terms of just how to take these different roles that we play and be as effective as we are able to be. But the context that I use, the examples that I use have to do with teaching online. In fact, the first version of the book didn't have that little caveat of and offline. And because so many of the examples transcend online, they asked, even though it's a part of a series of books about online teaching, they asked if I would be willing to include the offline in there. And I thought, sure, that's what I wanted to do in the first place. So it's been interesting to get to have conversations with people about productivity. And of course, I couldn't have predicted the pandemic and then some of the unique challenges that we would have had in these recent months and years. So I'm going to be looking at 5 things that if I just had to pick something out from what I've written about and put into practice in my own life and seen work in other people's lives, they really do come down to these 5 things. Being able to use our brain for what our brain is best at, and not trying to make it do things that it doesn't do very well, at least not as well as a set of tools might for us. And then speaking of tools, some people, both with educational technology, I suspect all of you have probably seen this if this is the world that you live and work in, is people think the more tools, the better. They tend to think that with educational technology, and we're constantly trying to explain that no, that's actually not the goal here. It confuses people, and you want to really be having as limited of a tool that you use as deeply as you possibly can to create the kind of engagement and learning opportunities. It's similar with productivity tools. A lot of times people think, man, if I just had the 25 things that could keep me organized, and it's like, that's not what you need. So I'll be sharing a little bit about what are the most essential tools that we need, and where do we want to have some more finite boundaries around them? And then we want to talk about having places where things go, being able to put things away and having a pre-identified a system where I know where things go and I know where to have those things resurface when I need them. You may have heard of the power of checklists before. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about how they can help us with our own personal productivity. And then finally, I think nothing is more important other than being intentional and reflecting, as you've already started to do with me today. Thank you for that, around what are the roles that we play and what does success look like, those things. Sometimes we talk about work-life balance. Work-life balance didn't exist. It didn't exist before the pandemic. It most certainly doesn't exist now. I have a colleague who researches what's called work-life spillover, and work-life spillover certainly exists. And we see that in some negative ways in which our personal and our professional lives will in negative ways overlap into each other. But my colleague, Andrew Stenhouse, looks at also positive work-life spillover. And I had mentioned our son being here at home today, not feeling well. And I love that our son and our daughter get to see my husband and I in teaching roles, in presenting roles. And our daughter just volunteered. She's 7. She volunteered to do some public speaking around the upcoming holidays at her school. And her brother had to remind her, wait, you understand that would be you presenting in front of preschool, lower school, middle school, high school. She's like, yeah. And so I think sometimes we forget about the positive work-life spillover, that when our loved ones, the ones we care for, are able to see us in these contexts where in other possibilities, they might not have ever seen that. So I'll talk a little bit at the end and invite you to some conversations around ways in which we might be more intentional with how we spend our time and where we focus our attention. So one last reminder. At the start of this session, I said, we're going to think about not 20 things we can do after today's session. We're not going to, hopefully my goal is that we don't walk out of here saying, oh, she's got all these things and she's got it together and I'm not good enough and I'm not doing this thing right. I'm just asking for one thing, because that increases your likelihood of actually being able to get something good that's actually going to work for you, instead of walking out with guilt and shame and that what you're doing isn't enough. So let's have a look at what we might do when it comes to using our brains. And I don't mean this in a condescending way. I mean this in a way that so many times we try to use our brain to retain information when there are lots of tools, digital and analog, that retain information a lot better than our brains do. And so an author who I really like, he's written a book called Getting Things Done. And he says, your mind is for having ideas, not holding them. And people do often ask me, how do you do all the stuff that you do? How are you a podcaster and a speaker and author and the teacher and all that? Like, how do you do all of that stuff? And first of all, it's never as good as it looks. I do try to be really transparent that it doesn't always go perfectly for me either. But if I were to narrow down, one of the things I think I do well is I don't try to rely on my mind to remember really anything. My husband is very much of the same mindset. He created for us a checklist, which we'll be talking about checklists a little bit later on, but he created a checklist that's called the School Departure Checklist. And so we keep it in an app that's called Drafts. There's nothing that particularly special about Drafts, but think of it as like a little scratch paper, but it's a digital one instead. And before we pull out of that driveway, we're checking, does everybody have their masks? Does everybody have their red sweater, which they wear a uniform where they go to school? So it's like, do you have that? Because you need to have that. Does everybody has the spouse, one of the spouses done the health check? We have to do temperature checks at home before the kiddos head off to school. And in and of themselves, if you were to see the checklist, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not that, there's nothing that complex about it. I mean, surely people could remember to make sure the water bottles are in the bags. But the fact of the matter is, we don't drive them to school every day. And they're also their own independent beings. And just because you told a child to put a water bottle in a bag doesn't necessarily mean the water bottle got into the bag. And of course, when we're working with adults, the same thing comes true, where with all of the complex projects that we're managing, far better to have the ideas be what our brain spends its time doing. But getting those actions into systems, and especially if we're delegating to other people, whether that be students or whether that be colleagues, far better to use our collective brains and our individual brains better for what they do. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. What have you found yourself trying to hold in your brain that isn't necessarily the best ways to use our brain? So some examples of this might be, have you been worrying about things, or have you been trying to keep tasks in your brain and not getting them into some sort of an external system, or whatever gets talked about in meetings, have you been trying to carry that with you instead of having some way of identifying it? And John suggests in the chat a book, Work Clean by Dan Charnas. I'm not familiar with that, but it looks fabulous. What great chefs can teach us about organization. That looks fabulous, John. Thank you for that suggestion. And I will be able to add John's suggestion as well as the other ones that come out in our conversation today to that resources page I showed you earlier. So yeah, just go ahead and comment in the chat. What have you been finding yourself trying to hold in your brain instead of in some external system? Yeah, thanks for what you're sharing there. Ashley wrote about student stories and the crises that they're dealing with. I'll tell you, Ashley, that's my response to this one, is that weighs heavy. And like we talked about this morning, boy, it's just as if the collective issues weren't enough. I mean, they're also often dealing with some real individual struggles. I've had people's parents die this semester. I've had people living out of their car this semester. I mean, there's just so much, both, again, individual and collective trauma. And, we worry about them. We care about them. And that can be something that I definitely have felt myself trying to hold in my brain and wanting to find some healthier ways to maybe separate myself a little bit from that. And part of that is what we talked about this morning, as far as being able to have a good list of resources that I can refer people to, and wanting to be present for people. But it's not really that helpful for me if I'm not present with them, but still, having that linger around with me in my brain. So that's something I struggle with as well. So thanks for sharing those kinds of things. It looks like other ones of you have some heartbreaking things that have happened with the students that you teach as well, and some worries. and complexity that we're dealing with here. So the next area here is to get some tools. So if we want to use our brain for having ideas, not holding them, what would hold things then? What would be a better tool than our brains to try to capture some of these things? And David Allen, in that same book, Getting Things Done, he talks about that really it comes down to lists, and that there are different kinds of lists. And he has some basic suggestions that really there's three that come out as important. One is a task list. He calls them next action lists. A list of those next actions, a list of those tasks. A calendar he presents to us is really just a list, but a calendar is a list in a more visual form often of time-based or day-based commitments. So putting something on your calendar to remind you to fill out such and such a form. Some of you may have had this thing happen where it was on the calendar, but it was never captured in a task list separate from that. As soon as you forget at 8 o'clock on that morning or whatever it is, it's easy to then have a snowball effect. That being said, though, when it comes to calendars, a lot of us will have our task list, projects and tasks and those next actions, and then we'll identify out of them what the priorities are. And then in an upcoming week, in addition to the day-based and time-based commitments, I have this meeting, I'm teaching from this time to this time, to block out time from those tasks lists. It'll be important to work on this thing for a couple of hours this week and what have you. And then he talks about having notes, having a list essentially of reference material that we'll need in order to do our work. So let's take a look at some of these lists. So in order to look at these lists, we're going to talk a little bit about putting something away. So if I've got something on a list, I'm going to put something away. Well, where am I going to put it? So I'm going to talk a little bit about email, which is another form of list, and what a better tool than email is for managing tasks. So let's take a look at those things. One of the tools that can be particularly helpful is to be able to distinguish for ourselves those things which we're committed to doing. I do need to attend this meeting. I do need to teach this class. I do need to grade this set of papers or this set of assignments. Those are things we're committed to doing. To those things that David Allen in Getting Things Done says, we might want to do someday. And again, back to so many of our professions, when we're involved in technology, I think so many times people assume that the second that we hear about some new tool, in fact, this morning, by the way, somebody in this morning's session put a couple of items that they thought would be good to add to the resources page, and I already added them there. And I have to tell you, they looked pretty amazing and I hadn't heard of them before, and I was tempted. But I thought, no, that's the kind of thing, going and looking at the couple of tools. By the way, I already added them to the resources page, but saving those kinds of things, go explore this technology, see how this might work. I put those kinds of things on my someday maybe list. It's not something that I'm committed to anyone that I have to do. And it becomes more like a playground of fun things that I thought at some point might be fun to explore. And I'm showing you a screenshot of a tool called Trello. Many of you have probably heard of or used Trello. This is basically a card-based application, and you can create different lists and then sort your cards onto them. What I really like about Trello and so many tools like this is that they assign a unique email address such that I can just email myself a link to a tool. I can include a picture or a photo or a screenshot to a tool, and I can include what is it that I want to check out. So at the time I took this screenshot, there was a Creative Commons certificate that sounded pretty neat to me. There was an ultimate guide to writing online, and you can see over on the left-hand side, this is my inbox. They arrive here because I email them to myself. And then I can just drag them around. I've got ideas about entertainment, technology I want to experiment with. I lead our Institute for Faculty Development. So are there things related to my professional work, my teaching, so on and so forth. And it's just a fun thing to separate out the someday maybes from my actual commitments, then makes my commitments easier to sort through and prioritize. And I do have it that once a week I come in and I might check out my someday maybe list and pick out one thing to actually place on my commitments that I want to check out that week. And it's just a much more lovely way to both look at one's next actions list or task lists versus also kind of having this playground to do as well. It really works. And Ashley asked the question, is Trello free? I am using the free version of Trello. It's one of those freemium ones. So every feature that I'm showing you here and also that I just talked about is part of their free plan. And then if you want to add some of their automation and some of their different views, then it is a freemium and you can pay for it. But so far, I've been really enjoying the free version. And I can even have people, by the way, I have a someday maybe list just for podcast guests. So people all the time will let me know of someone who would be great to have on the podcast. I can't get back to everyone, but I can email it to my someday maybe podcast guest list. And then I can also have other people collaborate on that list. I've had people who have listened to every episode of Teaching in Higher Ed, and they can come in there and give me input. I allow them that ability to come in and make comments. Oh, this person would be great. Yeah, that would be terrific for you to talk to and that kind of thing. Who can tell me in the chat what it is that I am showing right now, other than the obvious, this is my email application, but what state of my email application? It's a little bit of an internet meme as well. Am I showing here? Ashley's got it already. So this is what is known by productivity geeks as inbox zero. Some people look at an inbox like this and think that it means that at this time when I took this screenshot, I must have done all of the work in the world. I must have accomplished and checked off every box of every to-do item that I've ever had and gotten back to everyone on their emails and taken care of everything. That is not what inbox zero is either realistically seeking, nor would that ever be something that most, perhaps even I might dare say all of us could ever aspire to. But what inbox zero aspires to is to not try to have email serve as a task manager. It wasn't designed to be a task manager. Yes, there are features such as flagging emails that many of our email clients offer us. There are some like Outlook, for example, where you could drag an email over into a task list, for example. I have a task manager that I'll show you in just a second where I can email into it, just like I talked about with Trello, how I can email into it. But the idea here is that when we leave things in our inbox that are undone, we have to keep returning to them over and over and over again. And it perpetuates this sense of other people setting our priorities for us and having this have us determine whether or not we are succeeding. So it's a very responsive kind of priorities, as opposed to taking that time to do some of the deeper work and initiate more things versus responding to other people's needs and wants. So yes, we do need to, in all of our jobs, be people who are responsive, but if that's all we do, and we don't take the time for intentionality and reflection for what Stephen Covey in his writing talks about, he calls it quadrant 2. These are things that aren't urgent. Like I don't have to pick up that telephone call. Back in the days when people actually picked up their phones, I don't have to go to that meeting. It's not a set time, but it's that intentional work that I do to reflect on purpose and mission. And I might do that collectively, either as a class, some of the metacognition work, that thinking about our own learning and reflecting on our own learning. That's the kind of work that doesn't often show up in an inbox. And many of you know this, but if you were to just take an inbox, you could put it in another folder, be that an archive folder, or you can see in the lower left-hand corner here a little peek of some of the things I like to keep an encouragement folder, both digitally and physically, both in my personal life and also in my professional life. That's some of the fruits of just doing this hard work that we do, that I need to revisit those things and be reminded sometimes of why I do what I do. sometimes people don't either understand that how easy it is to get back to things. So sometimes we talk about just needing a reset. I've had colleagues who have gotten to 7,000, 10,000 unread emails in their inbox. And every time they open up email, it's the guilt, and it's months and years and months of guilt that they don't have to take around in their lives. And I'll try to explain, if you just take this and you move it over, you can still get to it, but we kind of need to reset things, because that's too much guilt and shame to walk around with. And so my encouragement to us is to use email for what email is good for, and to not use it as a task manager, to separate that task and those priorities and have the emails that represent actions that David Allen talks about. If something takes less than 2 minutes to do, then let's just answer that email right away. But if it's part of a larger project, I've got some letters of recommendation that I'll be writing in the coming weeks. And so better for me to forward the requests for the letters of recommendation to my task manager and to handle them all at once. So this is often called batch processing. So I'm going to be focusing on one type of an activity rather than write one letter of recommendation one week and another one another week, to stack them together. Once I'm in that mode, the template's open. I've got the mindset of writing letters. It's better to collect those things together and get those things outside of our email inboxes. I will say one thing about zero inbox. I have found it to be helpful to me. I just look at this screen like you're looking at here, and I just start to breathe. This just feels good. It's not even the current state of my email, by the way. This is a screenshot, not reality. But when I'm able to attain it, it does feel good, but I'm not a perfectionist about it. I think we can get a little too legalistic about this kind of thing, and that is the critiques of zero inbox that some people have had about it. So my question for you is, what needs a place in your life? So I talked about, is it tasks that need a place in your life? Do you need a place for ideas like a someday maybe? Do you need a place for those notes or those digital bookmarks or links? Could you comment in the chat what needs a place in your life? Comment in the chat what needs a place in your life. Go ahead and comment in the chat what needs a place in your life. I'm seeing a lot of tasks. I'm seeing some ideas, some longer term commitments, things that aren't due immediately next week. Yeah, John is bringing up the idea that zero inbox can be a false sense of organization and completion. I agree with that, John. Without a system that addresses the need for projects and tasks that get managed, it could be chasing after something that doesn't have the benefits unless those other systems are in place for maintaining where we're going to spend our time and attention. Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah, Craig's talking a little bit about how to improve our classes and where did those kinds of ideas go. A number of people have talked about on the podcast before doing some type of journaling about our classes. What do I want to do better? What didn't work this time around? I don't tend to be too formal in my journaling, but I do tend to want to just catch those quick ideas. That didn't work super well, but I'm not going to be able to fix it right now. But I do have in my task manager where I keep track of that. Next time I teach this class, I've got the 5 things I need to do, quick fixes on that kind of thing. So it can be iterative over time and learning from my experience. And I wanted to just point out to you really quick, this is the resources page that I spoke about at the start of this session. And so many of you are talking about the kinds of tools that you would like to use. In the book, so here's the resources page. And if you scroll down to the bottom where it says tools and tweets, this productivity tools consolidated, which I'll put a link to in the chat just so that you have it with you. That's a consolidated list of all of the tools that I talk about in the book, including Task Manager, since so many of you mentioned that as the type of tool you would want. And it's all alphabetized. So if you go down to Task Managers, you'll be able to see both which one I use, and some of these are affiliate links. We make a small amount, not many of them are, but if it's got the two little carrots, then that is a link that will take you over where it's affiliate. It also are tools that we either use or have read in this particular case. So thanks for sharing about that. Ashley wants to know if this website will be accessible forever. And I mean, as long as the website's around, which is to say, my hope is yes. My hope is yes, it's not going anywhere. But yeah. And if you were to want to see resources from others speaking, you can just click on speaking and be able to access pages like this for other talks that I've given. So I am realizing now as we continue our conversation together that it is now almost time for me to be looking toward wrapping up. And I didn't mention to you all that I have a friend and colleague whose name is Shannon, who is joining us today. And she agreed to help me with a drawing. So as we close our time in about 15 or so minutes, she is going to be helping me do a drawing. We found this really fun website that's called wheelofnames.com. And she has been collecting your names, and you're all being entered into a drawing for my book. And so the organizers of this year's ETOM conference have said they'll be able to put me in touch with you if you are the winner of that book. And so in a few minutes, we'll have Shannon actually spin the wheel. But if you have yet to put anything in the chat, whether it's a contribution, a reflection, a question, then you'll want to do so between now and when Shannon does that drawing for us. So thanks early on, Shannon, for being willing to do that for us. And thanks everybody for being willing to share in the chat. So just a few minutes left as we think a little bit more about tools, and then we'll go on to the last topic, which has to do with intentionality. So thanks for those ideas of what needs a place in your life. Our last practical tool before we talk about getting intentional has to do with checklists. A checklist is like a task list in that we're going to check things off, but they're things that get repeated. And one of the best books, in fact, the only book I've ever read about checklists is by a man named Atul Gawande. And he talks about checklists in that book. He says, good checklists are precise and above all practical. The book I'm referring to is called The Checklist Manifesto. And it is absolutely a riveting book. In a million years, I did not think that a book all about checklists would be as fascinating as it is. He himself is a surgeon, and he talks about the ways in which checklists today are literally saving people's lives. Something as simple as having people in the operating room introduce each other and having a checklist that says, this is the surgery that we're performing on this particular appendage. And there's a couple of things that happen out of that, such as we don't perform the surgery on the wrong appendage, but also the ways in which the power differentials can be balanced out better if everybody introduces themselves, and sort of this culture that says everyone's role here matters, such that it is more likely, they have found, that someone will speak up and say, hey, that's actually not what's supposed to happen, or I'm concerned about this, that it can create a better climate for people to give input. Imagine all of that happening from a checklist of all things. And it's not just medicine. He talks about pilots using checklists. He talks about architects using checklists, and even just practical everyday checklists, like the one I spoke about that Dave, my husband, has created, the school departure checklist. I use checklists quite a bit. I use checklists whenever I do an episode of the Teaching in Higher Ed podcast. So I'll send people out an invite to please fill out this form, which includes your bio, and you upload your photo so that their bios will show up on the show note page for the episode. I can't keep track of who sent theirs in. I just recorded yesterday with 4 book authors. I could never hold that much in my head. So I just have it. Oh, have all 4 book authors fill that out? Have I sent a proper thank you to people? Have I publicized about the episode on social media? And as you can imagine, I'm nearing 400 episodes now. These things happen in different orders. And so it's just such a luxury. It feels so good just to say all of that. I don't have to worry about. It's all there. I know when things need to come in, and as they come in, I can check them off, or if it's something that I take care of. And it's just a wonderful way of using checklists. Yes, every episode is the same order of things, but I have to rely on other people. We have a podcast editor. I have someone who does the quote graphics and such for the episodes. So this is a nice way to outsource those kinds of things that some of us keep in our brain, such that I can have my ideas in my brain. Our brains are for holding ideas. Our brains are for having ideas, not holding them. So you probably, if you use Canvas, there's similar things in Blackboard, but there's a consolidated to-do list for students. So they're able to see across all of their classes, their own little to-do list. I was at the Canvas conference years ago where they talked about that they had studied how students use Canvas. And so many of us design our courses. By the way, I totally did this. I totally used to be just thinking they would just come into my class and that they would be looking at it that way. But of course, they're thinking about all of their classes and all of their deadlines and all of their to-dos. So there's a really nice consolidated to-do list. And also, I love this. So many times we've spent time giving feedback to students that they never, in fact, ever saw. So they've resurfaced that with recent feedback, and then an easy place to be able to get to grades. And this view that I'm showing you now is, of course, as a professor, being able to see what I need to grade and then what assignments are coming up, so I can be helping aim our attention of, oh, this is coming up, it's going to be due here, and is there any additional clarification that I need to give? So in the last category of things I want to be talking about, actually, you know what, before we do that, I want to just take a moment because I want to hear from you. In the chat, would you mention any kinds of checklists that you have found useful in your life, be they personal ones, be they professional ones, teaching oriented, as a leader, what have you? Oh, looks like Vincent's already doing this for me. Thank you, Vincent. Vincent has kicked this off. Thank you. And by the way, I'll put that in the resources section for this. That looks excellent. So a new semester checklist. That does look awesome. I haven't looked at this yet, Vincent, but Canvas has put together something around a checklist for Canvas classes. I'll put that in the resources as well. Joel is talking about an assignment checklist with start and end dates. And Joel, when we do this for our students, it can really help them too have a sense, especially for those group projects or ones that are going to happen over more time. Deanna's talking about the Todoist app. And in all of the reading that I do about various task managers, if you're not talking about one that is platform specific, such as a Mac one or Windows one, Todoist hits the top of every one I'm aware of being platform agnostic or operating system agnostic. It's a really well done, really well done. Microsoft, by the way, Microsoft To Do, I have students this time because we're an Office 365 campus. I have them using it because Todoist's free education plan went away at some point. And so just to get them used to using these kinds of tools, and it's a pretty good one. It actually used to be called Wunderlist, and then they acquired Wunderlist. And so Microsoft To Do is a pretty good one to check out as well. And thanks for the ideas that you're sharing there. Ashley's talking about Google Keep. And that's in those types of things that Getting Things Done says we should have. That's kind of the notes. Although in this case, a real powerful kind of note where we can save images and websites, and she's saying we can do handwriting there as well. Megan's sharing about a weekly checklist of assignments, and I've seen a lot of really good examples of this. If we can make it visual and have it that much easier for them to take in what's going to happen this coming week, kind of helps orient them. I find that it also helps reduce some of their stress and anxiety around how much it is, where I show, hey, this is really not that much. It looks like a lot, but that's because I've provided you with a lot of detail. And Linda Lee is sharing about how she shares activities for students based on Canvas. Yeah, thanks. And Ashley's putting on her someday maybe list Microsoft to do. Yeah, I kind of didn't know it was as good as it was, but it's, you know, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good, including that they can flag emails. And if they turn the setting on, they can show it up in Microsoft To Do. Another thing I really like about Microsoft To Do is you can sort of plan out your day. Productivity experts call this the big three. Rather than thinking we're going to get everything done, what is the 3 most important things that I might get done today? And Microsoft To Do has a way where you can identify these are, I mean, you could identify as many as you want, but you could put into practice things like the big 3 by identifying what is my day going to look like today. And it's just a quick check and it'll put them up there. All right, keep those ideas coming. And I have one final thought for you around being intentional. So this is less about all the tools and doing things quote unquote right and getting it all down. And it's, to me, even more important as far as what we can do to be productive people. And by productive, I mean being able to use our time and attention for the things that actually are meaningful to us and seem like they are of significance. And this author, Christopher Emdin, to me, stresses so much the ways in which being intentional about who we spend our time with and how that can really help us either thrive or can really have detrimental effects depending on what choices we make. So this is from Christopher Emdin. He says, the kind of teacher you will become is directly related to the kinds of teachers you associate with. Teaching is a profession where misery does more than just love company. It recruits, seduces, and romances it. Avoid people who are unhappy and disgruntled about the possibilities for transforming education. They are the enemy of the spirit of the teacher. So I'd love to know from you in the chat, who is someone in your life who brings you life, someone in your life who brings you joy, who their sense of positivity about the world tends to uplift you, and who you'd like to spend some more time with. And you don't have to say the person's name. You could even just say how you know that person, or, you know, how they relate.
Hi.
I'm not able to mute people, but we might need a little bit of help with a mute. Our my ETOM friends. Oh, you got it. Thanks for your responses so far. We've got some grandchildren bringing us life and joy, some great social sciences colleagues, good friends, my pups, Gary Brand, my family, travel buddy. I mentioned to you that on today's session, I've got my colleague Shannon, who brings me so much joy. And one of the things that we do to really bring each other a lot of life is we will actually go for walks together. And I put together in air quotes, we'll just put our earbuds in, and wherever we are, if we're working on campus or working from home, even if we're not together, we like to go for a walk outside wherever it is that we are in a given day. And that time, she's such a positive person. Shannon, since you're here, you are such a positive person and bring me so much joy in doing that. And speaking of Shannon, as you're continuing to add to the chat people who bring you life, Shannon has been, as I mentioned, gathering names. Shannon, do you need another minute or two to grab names, or do you think you caught most people? I don't know if we've had new people coming in. You're all such a good job responding. Oh, she says she's good. All right, Shannon, you want to share your screen? Because we're going to do a raffle for a book. And Shannon, I just am feeling like we should raffle. Let's do 3 books. So we're going to do 3 spins of the wheel. And here we go. Our first spin. We will see who the winner is of our first spin. All right, the first winner is Kim. Was that a G? Kim G. Congratulations to Kim. And Kim, we're gonna, the people, the leaders from ETOM said they would help me put me in touch with you so I can get an address for you and ship that out to you. Congratulations, Kim. All right, Shannon, let's do two more. All right, we have Gina M is our second winner. Congratulations to Gina M. And one more spin of the wheel. All right, our final winner is Beth H. So congratulations to our three winners. Thank you, Shannon, for being willing to join us today and do our raffle. And by the way, she was using a fun free tool called wheelofnames.com. And it's super fun. I don't know if you noticed, but the ETOM logo is in the middle there. You can upload graphics. You can change the color schemes to match whatever branding you may want to match. And we've had a lot of fun with that, both with faculty development and also with students. So that's kind of a fun one if you'd like to be using that in your own teaching. And I'd like to just close and share a story with you about a recent webinar that I attended. There's a guy who, I use a Mac, and so there's a guy whose nickname is Mac Sparky. His real name is David Sparks, and he's one of the co-hosts of a podcast that's called Mac Power Users. And as you might imagine, if you can't tell this about me already, I can just geek out with the best of them. And he did a whole session called something like the magic of email or making your email work or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the webinar was called, but I was so excited about it. And he starts talking about all this kinds of automation that we can do using something called Keyboard Maestro, because I love to use keyboard shortcuts and I could actually not even have to touch my mouse to get the email into the different systems. And like me, he plays different roles in his life. He's both an attorney and he's a podcaster. So he even had it set up that the shortcuts were similar to move things around, but different for his different roles. So he had all these sort of global keys that he would press. And I am just completely like a kid in a candy store as he's going through all of these things. And it's probably about an hour-long webinar. And as it gets to the end, he makes a joke. It's an inside joke for Mac users. When Steve Jobs used to be alive and he used to work for Apple, he would put on quite the production as he would roll out new products. And he would like to sort of taunt the audience and say, announce all these really cool things. And then at the very end, he would say, one more thing. And so David Sparks did that in his session after going through all these fun automation ways to just make everything work and it's magic and all this. And how are we going to do this? He says, one more thing. Don't be good at email. And it literally stopped me in my tracks, just remembering, and he talked about for himself that sometimes people that just love the podcast and want to share ideas with him, no, he's not able to get back to all of the people. I've been pretty terrible at always getting back to guests for the podcast on the day that the episode airs. Sometimes I go 1, 2, even 3 weeks without even sending them word because I just haven't even been able to pull my head up enough. And to me, it comes back full circle to what I began with, that we need to be gentle with ourselves. We need to reflect on what's important to us and what actually is going to matter and make a difference. And we need to recognize we can't do it all and how difficult that this all has been for us. And in many cases continues to be for us, and just to be gentle with ourselves. So I leave you with that, don't be good at productivity. And of course, I wrote a book about productivity. I really think these things can help us. But when we try to aim too much for thinking that it's just like we're missing the one app or the one thing, and if we could just be a better human being or find the perfect tool, that it's always going to be okay, and to realize that it's going to get messy, and that some of these systems can help when it does get messy, it be a little less messier, but we're not aiming for perfection. We're aiming to be human. and we're aiming to be present for other people. I love what Deanna says in the chat. Good enough is enough. Thank you so much. What a wonderful way for us to wrap up that thought. I'm going to one more time put in the chat that link in case you missed it early on to the resources page that I pointed out a little bit ago. And so as promised, I'm going to invite each person to please share in the chat. What is the one thing, not the 20 things, what is the one thing that you'd like to commit to yourself and to us that you will be giving a try after today, or exploring more or experimenting with in what I shared today? So please go ahead and type that in the chat. And I will be going back. Thank you for all of the contributions that you made in the chat. I know we had a couple of books that were mentioned, a couple of tools. And so I'll be going back and modifying that resources page and updating it with your ideas. So thank you for the conversation. And thank you again, Shannon, for coming and being our wheel of names. I would never have been able to type people's names in while we were doing this. So that was great, Shannon. Thanks so much. And just thanks for our walks. And Gary, I'll go ahead and kick it over back to you for your announcements.
Awesome. Thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for your keynote and your workshop and persevering in the face of adversity with technical issues and sick kids and everything. You're a model for us. So thank you very much.
Well, and thanks for your picking up the facilitation.
Sure, it was easy. I just watched the chat. Thanks to GRCC Media Technologies and Distance Learning for being in the background, Ian, Noah, class, all the folks who helped out with the technical side of things. Thanks to the presenters and all the moderators. Don't forget about that survey that I sent out to you an email. We'll have more and more resources on the conference page. Presenters, if you still want to get a resource to me, something you want to share, just email it to me. And we will have recordings of the sessions published at a future date. We'll make an announcement when that's ready. On that note, I think that's my admin stuff. If there are any ETOM executive board members, Kevin, who want to throw something in here at the end before we end, take it away.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Gary said about thanking all of you for attending. Thanks to Bonnie for the keynote and for the workshop. And thank you for all our breakout session presenters as well. Special thanks to, like Gary said, GRCC and Gary himself for all the work, the ETOM Executive Board as well. I just want to make sure that I remind you about upcoming ETOM meetups. Don't forget about those. Those are awesome times to continue this conversation, subject-related items. Make sure that you find us and follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for announcements on the upcoming workshops that we will be hosting. And if anyone wants to post a blog in the upcoming months, have something that you have interesting going on at your institution, we would love to hear from you and love for you to have the opportunity to share with us. So thanks, everybody, and have a great weekend. And if anyone else has anything to say, fire away.